Okay, we're about to begin. If all
Recording in
counselors could
progress.
take a seat, and if everybody would take a seat and be quiet. We can't begin until we have quiet in the room. Thank you very much for that. Counselor Kelly, would you like to lead us in the pledge? Well, flag is back. To the flag, United States of America.
States of America,
To the republic
and to the
for which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Please be aware that this meeting is both being audio and video recorded. And I have to announce who is joining us remotely. So tonight we have Counselor Baker, Counselor Gentile, and Counselor Lipoff. And I know Counselor Norton will be joining us later. Okay. Yeah, folks, if you want a seat, there's a balcony up there, and you can get up to the balcony and have a place to sit down. Yes, there's also seats in the front row. I see, I was going to do this later, but I think I'm going to do it now because I see our planning staff and our law department staff in the back of the room. So I would like a suspension of the rules to ask the planning staff and the law department staff to come inside the rails so that they could be our technical assistants tonight. Thank you. So Counselor Crossley has moved that we would invite the planning staff and the law department staff inside the rail to help us technically. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Should we have a roll call?
Presiding officer can rule on whether or not that passed.
I think it passed. Okay, we'll have a roll call vote. Okay.
You can ask her that question too. Counselor Baker. Counselor Baker?
Excuse me, what is the roll call for?
So we had a suspension of the rules to invite the planning staff and the law department staff to come and assist us with technical assistance as issues come up during the night, because right now they're standing in the back of the room and it seems like we could ask them to come and sit down. And that is what Counselor Lucas has asked for a roll call vote on.
Thank you. Counselor Baker.
Actually expect me to read this.
Counselor Bowman.
Aye.
Counselor Crossley.
Aye.
Counselor Danberg.
Aye.
Counselor Downs.
Aye.
Counselor Gentile.
No.
Counselor Greenberg.
Aye.
Counselor Grossman.
Aye.
Counselor Humphrey.
Aye.
Counselor Kalis.
Aye.
Counselor Kelly.
Aye.
Counselor Krinsman.
Aye.
Counselor Laredo. Counselor Leary.
Aye.
Counselor Lipoff.
Aye.
Lucas.
No.
Counselor Maliki.
No.
Counselor Markowitz.
No.
Counselor Noel.
Aye.
Counselor Norton. Counselor Oliver.
No.
Counselor Ryan.
Yes.
Counselor Wright.
No.
President Albright.
Aye.
And I'm, this is Counselor Baker, no.
No.
Suspension of the rules, 3/4 votes. Suspension of the rules, 3/4 votes.
So we would need 18. So the motion fails with 17 yeas and 6 nays.
Did folks know that it required a three-quarters vote?
Yes.
Okay. So, I don't know who will run the maps for us when the time comes when we're doing the map amendments. That will be very awkward. We may have to wait until the next meeting when we can try this again. But we can at least do the text amendments tonight. And we will have no guidance from the planning department or the law department if amendments are made from the floor that we don't have any guidance on. Okay. I am terribly sorry, staff, but that's what we voted.
Madam President,
Yes.
as Maureen Lemieux, CFO, often does, I don't see why questions can't be asked of staff who could answer from the podium. We do that all the time with other staff, including our CFO and our, CEO. So just a thought.
Councilor Noel?
I think it's been clear that the decision is that the planning department not be in the meeting. So I think if that means we can't discuss certain things, we can just hold it for another meeting.
Yes. I think that's correct. Okay. Planning staff, I'm terribly sorry. Hopefully, we will have your help at the next meeting if we don't finish tonight. Okay. Let's start the night. Start the night off. Councilor Crossley, would you please just read this docket item into the record and the vote one more time for us? Just to remind us what we're doing tonight?
Thank you, Madam President. The one item that's before us is 38-22, which is the Zoning and Planning Committee requesting review, discussion, and possible ordinance amendments. Somebody's machine is on.
Councilor Wright, are you talking over there?
Okay, I'll start over. The one item that's before us is item 38-22, the Zoning and Planning Committee requesting review, discussion, and possible ordinance amendments relative to Chapter 30 zoning ordinances pertaining to mixed-use business districts and village districts relative to the draft zoning ordinance. This was formerly number 88-20. That is the item that's before us for a vote. And the vote, this is a memorandum, so the vote, as I recall, was there were 7 members present in the meeting, 5 voted in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. And that item was chartered at our last meeting a week ago. So I want to talk to, we have a reverberation here. I want to talk about process tonight as a beginning. First thing I want to do is clear up confusion. Why is it echoing? Is your mic on, or is anybody's mic on?
You have to mute Councilor Baker. Mute Councilor Baker, he's also on his computer.
Okay, are you muted, Councilor Baker?
Madam President, this gadget is smarter than I am, and I hope I can turn it off.
Okay, yes.
But I was traveling and I didn't hear the full scope of the motion to suspend, but my sense was that if there was an opportunity to ask specific questions of the planning department, as opposed to a general opportunity to advise us, I think you might get a different outcome. So
as I said, Councilor Baker, when I called for the suspension, that we need the technical help, we need someone to run the maps, so that when someone says, I want to eliminate plot number 32, they can show us where plot number 32 is. That was technical assistance. I was clear about that. So we've made the vote, Councilor Baker. I think it's over.
Okay.
Okay. So there's been, based on the emails that we've received, there's been a tremendous amount of confusion on what we're doing tonight. We had lots of emails that said, don't pass the VCOD, just pass the MBTA Communities Plan, or jettison VCOD, but keep MBTA. So I want to be sure that there is no confusion in this room amongst us about what we're doing tonight. There's one docket item, the one that Councilor Costley just read into the record, and that docket item resulted in the creation of the VCOD, the Village Center Overlay District. And that was what was created by ZAP, the planning staff, and our consultants. There are not two plans, just one that we're working on tonight. And that really has two parts, the text amendments, the text ordinance, and the accompanying map. That's the two parts that we're going to be discussing amendments to tonight. And there's only one set of rules for all the villages, not two sets of rules, one for VCOD and one for MBTA. All the villages that we approve will be under the same rules, and they will apply to any villages we decide to include on the map. So I hope at least amongst us, I know the public is confused about that, but I hope amongst us we're all on the same page. Secondly, the issue of Auburndale has come up. I'm sure you're aware that a number of people are trying to upgrade the 3 Worcester Line stations for a very long time. Unfortunately, Newton made a terrible mistake back in the days when the turnpike was going in, and they created 3 horribly inaccessible stations, each with only access to one track, which really screwed up service, to put it mildly, in Newton. Representative Khan has been working on that for 20 years to fix those stations. Councilor Norton and myself have been working on it for over a decade, and more recently the mayor and Congressman Auchincloss has been trying to help us. We've all put a lot of sweat and tears into those 3 stations, and we're kind of very close to fixing them, actually. The notion of making sure that we talk about Auburndale will be part of the process. We have 3 letters, which I think you should have on your desks, that describe various points of view of whether the funding could be available with or without Auburndale. So I hope you will have a chance to read them, and that will become part of the conversation for tonight's work or next Monday's work, whichever way we go with this. Okay. And now, and I want to be clear, the reason why Auburndale wasn't included in the MBTA station villages is because it's too small. It's a technicality. According to the MBTA guidelines, it's too small. That's why it wasn't included. So our job tonight is to review and vote on all the amendments that have been made to the extent that we can without the technical assistance we need. These amendments will be amending the ZAP recommendation to approve the VCOD with all villages, including, so the MBTA villages are Newton Center, Newton Highlands with Elliott Street, Newtonville, West Newton, and Waban. And the rest of them are Auburndale, Newton Corner, Nonantum, Newton Lower Falls, and Newton Upper Falls. And we will be amending that recommendation tonight. There's been much discussion about 3 things with respect to these villages, and I think we're all aware of that. The first is that we only vote for the MBTA compliance villages. The second is that we just, as I just mentioned, that we include Auburndale or not. And the third is that we pass all the villages. So what I would like to do is to ask for a sense of the council tonight about where we are as a group in terms of those 3 things. And why am I doing that instead of actually having a vote on it? So there are many amendments that have been submitted to us tonight that will affect the number of units. For example, if we were to get rid of all the VC3, that would change the number of units. If we were to add parking, that would change the number of units. And if we go below the 8,330 units that we're required to do by the state, we will need to bring in another village, more units. And so I want to wait and hold the formal vote on those 3 items until we've had more information that we create ourselves through these amendments that we're going to do tonight. And then we will have the formal vote later. But I think it will cool down the conversation considerably if we have a sense of the committee, like a straw vote. But it's a sense of the committee, sense of the council, I guess it was what I need to call it, and see where people stand on those three issues. So the first one being only voting for the MBTA compliance villages. So I would ask first for, so those are the three things I'm going to be asking about. Only voting on MBTA compliance villages, to include Auburndale with the MBTA compliance villages. Or actually, let me take out the word only on the first one. Let's just say vote for the MBTA compliance villages will be the first. Second will be to include Auburndale. And the third will be to pass all the villages as the current ZAP recommendation gave us. So I would ask for a show of hands for the first one, for who wants to only have or just have the MBTA compliance villages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we have 10 for that. We have, and then who wants to include, who's interested in potentially including Auburndale along with that? Did I count myself? Oh, I wasn't on that. 1, 2, 3.
Madam Chair, point of information. Did you, you took out the word only. Did you mean to ask us if we support having them at all, having, would we vote to have the MBTA compliant villages?
Yes, yes.
I think you might get a different result if that's the question. If you don't say, if you're asking us, you took out the word only and then it came back in.
Well, it's hard to, the issue of Auburndale is awkward because help me word it so that it doesn't, I don't mean it to be only, I mean it to be, do we want the MBTA villages?
Will you vote for a package that has all of the MBTA compliant villages in it?
Yes, that's good.
How's that?
Yes.
Okay.
Can we try that one again? So as Councilor Crossley suggested, will you vote for a package that includes the MBTA villages in it?
And can somebody list those villages for us?
Yes, I will, yes. They are Newton Center, the MBTA compliance villages are Newton Center, Newton Highlands, Newtonville, West Newton, and Waban. Elliott, Newton Highlands, yes. Yes. Go ahead, Councilor Oliver.
So then, sorry, I can't stand this thing. Are you asking us if we want the MBTA compliant villages, and then later, are we going to be asked, do you want the other villages?
Exactly.
Okay, so in effect, they're kind of, if we vote for one but not the other, we're saying we're voting for only one or the other.
Yes. If you vote for one and not three, that will give us a sense of where we're headed tonight.
Understood.
Okay. So now, the wording was, will you vote for a package that includes the MBTA compliance villages? So a show of hands on that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 18 there. Okay. Will you vote for a package that includes Auburndale? And, well, we've just voted on the MBTA. We know that there's general indication that people want that. Okay, Auburndale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 13 there. Okay, passing, do you want to include, do you want a package that includes all the other non-MBTA villages, and those are Auburndale, well, not Auburndale, so Newton Corner, Nonantum, Newton Lower Falls, and Newton Upper Falls.
Question on that, are you not, sorry, gotta stand up. You did not mention Thompsonville and Four Corners.
Well, yeah, you're right. Thompsonville and Four Corners should go on that list. Okay, thank you, Councilor Lucas. Okay. So how many people would like to see a package that includes all of those villages? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I think that gives us a sense for where we're headed tonight, and as we discuss this, and we will take a formal vote, of course, if there's an amendment that Councilor Wright has that will bring us into that kind of conversation, and we will get there when we get to the map amendments. But this will help us, I think, settle into where we're going tonight. Okay, so so the planning staff is not coming in, and now we can start on the amendments. One second. Yes, please. Okay, so Carol Moore, our clerk, has found, or one of you found, there's a specific planning staff, I hope you're still here. Section 6, admission within the rail. The clerk shall not permit any person other than a counselor or a member of the clerk's staff to be admitted within the rail of the chamber of the council, or within the members' lobby connected therewith, at any meeting of the council, except upon permission of the presiding officer or a vote of the majority of the council. So, what was the vote?
We had a majority.
Okay, so it was, Law Department and Planning, if you're still here, I would love you to come join us, because I think we need you.
I'm sorry, Councilor, can you say that rule again, please? You said the presiding officer or 3/4 vote?
No, the presiding officer or a majority vote of the council. Okay. So, I'll let you guys get settled. Do you have access to all the technology that you need? Okay. So, Councilor Wright, you have several amendments at the top of the list, so why don't we go there to you? The first one is, and this is according to Mr. Lamel's latest list, add MRT minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. Okay. Hold on, Councilor Crossley?
Point of information, just for the public's sake, and anyone else who might not be aware, we could point to the pages on the memo that we're using to organize these amendments. It's pages 7 and 8 of the November 3rd memo.
I'm not using that particular memo.
Okay. Who's using it? What memo are we using to order these amendments?
Mr. Lamel gave us a new listing of the text amendments. Actually, was that just today, Mr. Lamel? Yes. And they're in a slightly different order from our, this was our November 9th memo.
Point of order, where is that?
Yes, could you put that on the screen? That would help a lot. Mr. Lamel, you sent it to the city council this afternoon?
I don't have a copy in my inbox.
It's a link to an Excel file. Okay, hold on one second, Counselor Wright, we'll get organized here.
Madam President. Madam President? If we have such a document and it can be reproduced, I move we suspend the rules to allow it to be distributed to the members of the council because it's less than 72 hours in advance.
Do you want to take a minute to Xerox this?
And can we also get one emailed to those of us who are not in the chamber, please?
Would you forward that to the city council? Yep. Ms. Moore is forwarding it to the city council. Councilor Baker, would it be okay with you if we start on the first one while we're waiting for the Xeroxing?
Sure, just vote and suspend, and then we can be set when it arrives, but if you want.
Okay. Councilor Wright?
Okay, my first amendment, add MRT minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet and change lot frontage to 65 feet. Presently in our zoning for MR lots, for a new lot, it's a minimum of 10,000 square feet and an 80 feet frontage. This is a lot less, but not as low as what is being proposed. What's being proposed is no minimum lot size and 45 feet frontage. The reason why I want to increase it is the whole idea of MRT is adaptive reuse. We want to add on to the present house for more units and not for tear downs. And with a lower frontage and lower lot size, that's, I believe, incentivizing tear downs. And generally, if you're going to split a lot, usually a house is right in the center of the lot. So if you're going to split it, it's coming down. And we'd like to reduce it. So, and according to the planning department, this will change nothing in the number of units for MBTA count.
Okay, discussion. So you actually took two of them at once, the 6,000 square foot minimum lot size and changed the frontage to 65 feet. So comments on either of those two? Councilor Crossley.
Madam President, I'm just hoping that in this case, and it may be every case, the planning department can, for the sake of the public who's listening and may not understand the implications of each one of these amendments, rather than any of us trying to speak to the particulars, asking them to give their summary. We did take up these particular amendments in committee. They failed on a 2-6 vote, both of them. But I think it might be helpful for the public's sake to understand what each of them mean.
I was going to call you Counselor Kyra, Ms. Kyra.
Thank you, Madam President. We do want to actually clarify here, talking to our inspectional services department, we believe if you had a lot less than 6,000 square feet, you still could build something. However, the model from the state to calculate compliance with MBTA communities does take into account any minimum lot size requirements. So we believe the state may require us to incorporate that into the model, which would lose about 500 units. Now, we think we could try making an argument to the state to override that, as our local interpretation has always been not to factor that in when for new construction. But I did just want to flag that as potentially being an issue.
Okay. If there are any issues with the 65-foot frontage?
No, that's not incorporated in the model.
Okay.
Can we separate the two?
Yes, I think we'll vote on them separately, please. Councilor Crossley?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Ms. Kyra, and welcome into the Behind the Rail. I remember our discussion with regard to the minimum frontage. At first, as is pointed out in the Planning Department's memo of November 3rd, we had no minimum lot frontage either. And with much discussion, we decided that it would be wise to have something. We now have a parking requirement for new buildings in the MRT, and I know we're going to be discussing that again. But if you have a driveway and the setbacks that we require are now, I believe, 10-foot side yard setbacks, a 45-foot frontage gives you enough room for a reasonable size home when your footprint can only be 1,500 square feet. On a personal note, I live on a less than 4,000 square foot lot with a 40-foot frontage, and we've been very happy there for 38 years.
Anybody? Councilor Leary?
Thank you, Madam President. So I'm on the Zoning and Planning Committee, as you know, and we did discuss both of these twice in committee. And since the point of the MBTA Communities Law is to increase housing options and choices, and I'm actually in favor of seeing smaller units and smaller homes, which are by nature more affordable. As you know, we can't rely on our inclusionary zoning law to solve the problem. We need market rates to come down. And I think that's one way to do it, which is why I would not be supporting either of those two amendments.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to? Councilor Wright?
In fact, doing the minimum lot size and doing adaptive reuse will get more units than subdividing the lot. So a 10,000 square foot lot, there's enough space on there for 10 units. And a 15,000 square foot lot could accommodate, with all the setbacks and parking, 14 units. What we're trying to do is keeping the big Victorians, the original houses, adding on and adding a building in the back. What we're trying not to do is just tear downs, and that's where we always get all these complaints about the tear downs. So this is just another incentive to keep the original house and adding on, keeping our streetscape the way it is, and minimizing the tear downs. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay. Councilor Kalis.
Can I ask Ms. Kyra to respond to the minimizing teardowns?
Sure. So we believe that there are sort of a couple of scenarios here that we're looking to promote. It is minimizing teardowns, which the adaptive reuse provides more units and more square footage than new construction, which we believe is a huge incentive to minimize teardowns. We think it's also important where it's not feasible to keep an existing home, or there's a larger lot and maybe you want to keep the home on one to be able to subdivide and have some smaller lots and smaller units and smaller buildings. It's hard to say for certain exactly what will happen, but these provide some better alternatives than the incentives in our current zoning to tear down existing single-family homes and build large, expensive two-family condos or new single-family.
You all set, Councilor Kalis?
I'm set, thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, we can vote on these separately. Councilor Bowman.
Sorry, just a quick question for planning. So if we were to set a minimum lot size in MRT, does that mean that MRT could not apply to existing lots that are less than 6,000 square feet?
So our interpretation is that it could. That the way we currently apply our zoning rules, if a lot is non-conforming due to minimum lot size, which I'd say many lots in the city are, that you still have the ability to build new construction or to adapt an existing building on that lot. My one caution was that the model from the state incorporates minimum lot size and would exclude all lots under 6,000 square feet unless we can work with them to override that.
Sorry, I would like to make a comment on that. I think both for the reason that it could be excluded from the MBTA, but also because we have many beautiful, amazing neighborhoods in the city where most of the lots are far less than 6,000 square feet and have multifamily housing on it today. I think establishing a minimum lot size of 6,000 is overly restrictive, and I would urge my colleagues to not vote for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Laredo?
Thank you, Madam President. This is really a process question directed at Ms. Cairo or Director Heath. I understand our goal is to submit something to the state that we believe complies with the MBTA Communities Act. If we pass something that we believe in good faith complies, just the scenario you suggested, but the state says, no, we don't agree with that calculus for this reason, I assume all they're going to do is send it back to us and ask us to make the change, right?
I would assume so. They have not, they have not actually acted on any applications at this point for communities that have passed what they believe to be compliant zoning. So nobody has actually seen that process yet. But I would imagine they would come back and allow us to make changes to come into compliance.
I would, colleagues, as a matter of process, I mean, obviously, if we did something that was deliberately not compliant, the state's not going to approve it, and they're not going to give us a second chance. But if we do something relying on our planning staff, which says, we think in good faith we can make an argument there, then as I see it, the worst happens, there's some negotiation with the state and we change, which would be perfectly appropriate in my mind. But if we can make a good faith argument as to something being appropriate, I think we ought to proceed on that basis. Whatever our decisions are on the amendments themselves, and I'm not offering a suggestion as to what I think on those amendments, but simply as a matter of process, that's how I would suggest we proceed with all this, because my guess is this is not going to be the only instance where there's issues which, for lack of a better word, are a little bit ambiguous and are going to require some back and forth interpretation. So I would respectfully urge us to proceed that way as long as we're acting in good faith, and I think clearly we are. We ought to do what we think is right for the city and then proceed. And if there's a problem, this council can readily fix it down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a question to follow up with that. So we're trying to make sure that we stay at the 8330 level and not go below. How would you deal with your calculations if you're advising us, are we still at the 8330 level? Would you subtract those units or would you leave them in? What would you do?
It's a good question. I think we could reach out to the state for further guidance in advance. I don't know if we get a definitive answer because I think there would be some judgment here. We could put in that we weren't losing any units, but explain why we thought that and, send it to the state with our justification. I don't think we would submit something intentionally showing that we are below the compliant number.
Okay, so I think by taking by your answer that you would advise us not to subtract the units if we ended up passing this amendment. Yes? Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. And anybody else? Councilor Baker?
Sorry, I'm just going to just move the suspension so we can look at these documents, and then I have a question.
You want to suspend the rules
You've got new documents within the 72 hours.
View documents that we received this afternoon. Is that what you're just using?
Yes, and then I have a question on the merits.
Okay, let's vote on that first. All those in favor of allowing us to view the documents that we just received, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. You asked that they be provisionally accepted, and I just want to clarify that. But just to understand it, as I understand the way the state has done the calculation and the current version reported by the Zoning and Planning Committee, we have, 9,180 units as calculated, and the state's formula would allow, as I understand it, a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet, and that's in its calculations, is that correct? In other words, it wouldn't affect the number for the state. If this passed one way or another, it may affect as a matter of policy what we want to do, but it doesn't affect the count, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Not quite. So the model from the state factors in minimum lot size, and it then excludes all lots that fall below that minimum lot size. So you would not count, their model does not count any units that are, that would come from those lots that would be below 6,000 square feet. We would have to override that in a way and justify that decision to the state.
So the problem, as I hear it, is that we would have to argue that including a 6,000 is okay under their model, but it doesn't. They don't have a specific threshold, as I hear it. Correct?
Okay. They do not have a threshold.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Wright?
As Councilor Oliver and I put together that database, we touched every single lot there, especially the MRT, and there are only a handful that are below 6,000 square feet.
Okay. Any other comments? Then let's vote on this. We'll first vote on amendment to section 9.2.5A on the 6,000 square foot lot. I guess we have to do a roll call vote.
Councilor Baker.
Aye.
Councilor Bowman.
No.
Councilor Crossley.
No.
Councilor Danberg.
No.
Councilor Downs.
No.
Councilor Gentile.
Aye.
Councilor Greenberg.
No.
Councilor Grossman.
No.
Councilor Humphrey.
No.
Councilor Kalis.
No.
Councilor Kelly.
No.
Councilor Krinsman.
No.
Councilor Laredo.
Aye.
Councilor Leary.
No.
Councilor Lipoff.
No.
Councilor Lucas.
Aye.
Councilor Maliki.
Aye.
Councilor Markowitz.
Aye.
Councilor Noel.
No.
Councilor Norton.
Aye.
Councilor Oliver. Councilor Ryan.
No.
Counselor Wright.
Madam President, I changed my vote to aye. I thought it was a different, I thought you were doing the 65 feet.
No, 6,000 square foot. So you got aye.
Counselor Kalis is an aye, and Counselor Wright?
Aye.
Thank you. President Albright?
No.
Motion fails with 10 yeas, 15 nays win.
Okay.
Or wait, not 15, sorry. Hold on.
Yeah, 10 and 15 would be.
That does not match.
25 councils would be one too many.
So 10 nays, 14 nays.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll vote on the second one, which also amends 9.2.5A, which would change the MRT lot frontage to 65 feet. Council Wright, or anybody, planning, what is the lot frontage now that we require?
On MR lots, it's 80 feet for new lots in the MR district.
And do we have any requirement for?
In MRT, we added a lot frontage requirement of 45 feet.
45, so this, you're asking to change from 45 feet to 65 feet.
Which is below what we require now in our present zoning. Again, the reason for this is to incentivize adaptive reuse and have less of an tear downs. And not as many, it still will happen, but not as often. 45 feet is pretty narrow. And so if a lot's 90 feet wide, it can be subdivided. And again, generally, the main house is in the center of the lot, and so that's going to get torn down and 2 new buildings put in. So I'm trying to promote adaptive reuse. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on that one? Councilor Humphrey?
Thank you. Perhaps the planning staff could clarify their understanding of how this would compare not to to the point about the tear down risk versus adaptive reuse. If we make this change, is that going to actually disincentivize tear downs and adaptive reuse, or is it going to incentivize tear downs for single-family construction or two-family construction under the existing zoning rather than the new zoning?
So we don't believe the lot frontage has a big impact on the decision to tear down or not, especially increasing it slightly. You're going to have, driveway access, you have to meet the setbacks. We think the ability to have a larger building under the adaptive reuse is a far bigger incentive to reduce tear downs. We think it's important to have some flexibility. So if you do have some smaller lots, less frontage, that you can make that work. But we don't think this is a big factor in whether or not to tear down.
Councilor Bowman?
So similar to the question I asked on the last amendment, if we had a lot that, if the proposal is 60 feet, that only had 50 feet frontage, does that mean the MRT could not, since this is an overlay, we're not actually changing the zoning, does that mean that if it had a sub 60-foot lot frontage, does that mean the MRT zoning could not be used?
No, and we did confirm this with inspectional services and our chief zoning code official, that you still could use the MRT zoning. We also specifically wrote the overlay to allow nonconformities to opt in to the overlay district, to utilize the zoning, except for nonconforming uses. But all physical dimensional nonconformities can opt into the district.
Councilor Baker?
Again, just to clarify from the planning department, this has starting with the 9,180, does this reduce that number? It does not reduce the number. So
it does not.
It is not affecting our total. It's a policy choice about what width we want. It has no effect on the MBTA compliance. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Can we vote? Let's vote on this one. This is 9.2.5A, 65, changing from 45 feet frontage to 65 feet frontage.
Counselor Baker? Counselor Bowman?
No.
Counselor Crossley?
No.
Counselor Danberg?
No.
Counselor Downs.
No.
Counselor Gentile.
Aye.
Counselor Greenberg.
No.
Counselor Grossman.
No.
Counselor Humphrey.
No.
Counselor Kalis.
Aye.
Counselor Kelly.
No.
Counselor Kritzman. Counselor Laredo.
Aye.
Counselor Leary.
No.
Counselor Lipoff.
No.
Counselor Lucas.
Aye.
Counselor Maliki. Counselor Markowitz.
Aye.
Counselor Noel.
No.
Counselor Norton.
Aye.
Counselor Oliver.
Aye.
Counselor Ryan.
No.
Counselor Wright.
Aye.
President Albright.
No.
Motion fails, 10 yeas, 14 nays.
Okay. Counselor Wright, you're up again. This one will also amend the same section, but this has to do with increasing, I think it's increasing usable open space to 50%.
So presently, in our zoning, our usable open space is between 50 to 70%. This is where we have our trees, our grass, and it's not paved over. We're talking about MRT around our villages where there's less grass and trees. So I'd like to have some minimal or a little bit more area so that we can have trees. Trees are very important, especially near the village centers and heat islands. Trees improve air quality, increases water treatment, provides cooling from heat islands, and reduces energy use. And we have lost a significant number of trees in the past 40 years. I believe almost half of them. And we're going to be losing more. And the planning department can speak to this. An increase in the minimum open space requirement, they stated in their earlier memo, would be a loss of approximately 140 units.
I'm going to keep doing it all night. Ms. Kyra, not Counselor Kyra, do you have a comment?
That's correct. We would lose about 140 units. I would just point out that the controlling factor in MRT is really the building footprint. There's a pretty small building footprint of 1,500 square feet, which cannot increase, unlike our existing zoning where the building can get bigger with more lot area. So that's really what's going to determine the open space on the lot, which is why previously we thought the requirement of 35% was sufficient. We would also want to make sure this doesn't disincentivize adaptive reuse. If it would be too difficult, given that we're incentivizing it by allowing more building area, that they may not be able to meet the minimum open space requirement.
Any other, Counselor Baker?
When the department answers, if they just clarify the impact, as I understand it, this is not an impact on the count, is that correct?
It would be 140 units.
140 units, but it doesn't, that would reduce 9180 by 140. Okay. Thank you.
So if the planning department could, if any of these pass, if you could keep track of what we're doing, thank you very much. Any other comments? Councilor Crossley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, just for the sake of the public's understanding or clarification, if anyone isn't clear, we're talking about just the residential-only neighborhoods immediately surrounding our village centers. That's generally a block to several blocks, which may be designated MRT. And Ms. Kyra explained clearly that the other metrics we have in place, we did a few test cases, in fact, and a fair amount of open space is still remaining on those lots. So I take her point very seriously that in the case where you have large, say, Victorian or colonial mansions, or just large, on lots surrounding village centers, if you want to be able to give them that opportunity to expand toward the rear, you don't want to be too restrictive about the open space. It doesn't take away trees from any of our public land. And that comment about how many trees we've lost, I think we have a very clear count of the number of trees we've lost in our berms, that are public shade trees. But we never have counted trees in our residential lots. So it's a bit, it's not informative to think about numbers of trees that we don't own, because the city doesn't have that number. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wright?
So right now, we have a minimum of 50% up to 70% usable open space. Look at some of these houses in Oak Hill Park and other places where there's small lots. It seems to be all house, driveway, very little open green space. Increasing it up to a minimum of 50% will reduce some units, but it's 140 units compared to we have 91, whatever, 40 to work with. So for additional green and open space, I think this is something we could do.
Councilor Malachy?
Thank you. Just like to point out for people who haven't been following the tree ordinance debate closely, although we don't now know how much we're losing in terms of canopy on private land, that's something we hope to get data on as part of the revision. So up until now, the experience of tree loss is kind of felt by the abutters and neighbors of where the trees are coming down. With regard to the MRT, I think it's really important to have more usable open space. We saw in the examples on, I believe it was Madison Ave, the question was, why is it all pavement and, driveways? I do want to see green space, I want to see trees, I want to see room for swing sets. So I think if we want to make these family friendly, let's keep the playable area in the yard. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Councilor Markowitz.
Thank you, Madam President. This is the one kind of feature of much of the VCOD. Can you hear me okay, Deb? Yeah. This has been the one feature of the VCOD that has always kind of, I don't say concerned me, but it's kind of antithetical to many of, we always, on land use, and those of you who sat on land use, we look at the open space requirement very carefully, and we are very reluctant to budge. Of all the things that we have a hard time budging on, that's one of them. Reductions of pavement and all that. So I think the loss of open space that could result, and a developer will try, has to really, for economic reasons, maximize within the footprint of the dimensional controls all they can do. So I don't think this is a bad amendment. I will support it. I think that it's hard for me to say I want to be green. I want to minimize. I want to maximize play space. I want to maximize outdoor space, and not support something like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Question for the planning department: does usable open space include sidewalks and driveways?
So it doesn't include anything where you could park a car. So there was a parking requirement added by ZAP in the recommendation. So there is a parking requirement of 1 space per unit currently. Given the economics of this type of construction, we would expect that to be surface parking. So you are, by increasing that open space requirement, you are potentially excluding some lots from being able to make everything fit. But the building footprint, again, is something that's not in our current zoning. So what we see today, there isn't that sort of maximum footprint control where the building meets the land. The larger your lot, the larger your building based on FAR. So that really is the fundamental difference here, where a 1,500 square foot building footprint, you're going to end up with a good bit of space left on the lot typically. So we do expect to see a good bit of open space in most cases.
Okay. Anybody else? Shall we vote?
Counselor Baker.
Aye.
Counselor Bowman.
No.
Counselor Crossley.
No.
Counselor Danberg.
No.
Counselor Downs.
No.
Counselor Gentile.
Aye.
Counselor Greenberg.
No.
Counselor Grossman.
No.
Counselor Humphrey.
No.
Counselor Kalis.
Aye.
Counselor Kelly.
No.
Counselor Krinsman.
No.
Counselor Laredo.
Aye.
Counselor Leary.
No.
Counselor Lipoff.
No.
Counselor Lucas.
Aye.
Counselor Maliki. Counselor Markowitz.
Aye.
Counselor Noel.
No.
Counselor Norton.
Aye.
Counselor Oliver.
Aye.
Counselor Ryan.
No.
Counselor Wright.
Aye.
President Albright.
No.
Motion fails 10 yeas, 14 nays.
Okay, thank you very much. So this next one, Counselor Wright, is one that it's an amendment that you've changed. You've amended your amendment, or you've taken back one amendment and substituting this one. Do you want to explain that?
On the sheet, it's incorrect, but, so my original amendment was to reduce the special permit threshold from 30,000 square feet down to 15,000 square feet. But then we would get a hit, according to the planning department, of about 3,000 units, which would be hard to make up. What I'm proposing is I'm removing that, but instead of reducing the special permit, requiring site plan review on all VC2 and VC3 lots. Reducing the special permit, like I said, would take us out of compliance, and that's a lot to make up. I still believe we get a much better project with special permits, but we replace the special permit reduction with the site plan review. Site plan and design review is not discretionary. It is used to shape a project, not deny it.
So let me be clear. You did not mention the threshold of 15,000 or 20,000. So are you saying all VC2 and all VC3 would have site plan review?
Yes, and presently in our zoning, our proposed zoning is above 20,000 square feet. Lots above 20,000 square feet had site plan review.
Okay.
Again, it will not deny the project.
Yes, so could you state it again so that our clerk could put it up on the board?
So what I'm recommending is site plan review for all VC2 and VC3 lots. So I'm not doing a threshold at all.
Planning, can you just give us any sense of what size VC2 and VC3 lots are? Do you know the range?
Yeah, they run a broad range. We have some very, very small lots. And, you know, obviously we go well above the 30,000 threshold. We can look, we may have that information somewhere. We can look to pull it. But this would be applying to all lots, as I understand it, in VC2 and VC3. Right, not at a threshold.
No threshold.
So it would.
Councilor Baker?
Just to clarify, this has no impact on the count. It's just a, right?
It does not.
Yeah.
Councilor Greenberg?
So would this remove special permits for over 30,000 square feet?
No, it would not change that rule.
Okay.
Any other comments?
I have a question on just whether planning can give us a sense of the impact of that kind of review on the affordability, particularly for smaller lots and smaller developers.
Yeah, so it likely would have an impact on smaller lots and smaller development. You are reducing some of the risk that you have with the special permit currently, because it's not so much that you can deny it, but introducing a public process and not knowing the extent of what sort of changes or negotiations or how long that process is going to take does make things less predictable, does add cost, does add the cost of attorneys needing to come and present and submit applications. You know, we were comfortable with the threshold as it was because it's still a pretty small lot. I mean, 20,000 square feet is less than half an acre. You have plenty of single-family homes on lots that size. That it wasn't so complex. We have strong design standards built into the zoning that you didn't need that level of extra review until those sites got a little bit bigger and there was a little more complexity.
Councilor Wright?
Thank you.
Thank you. So for a VC3 lot with a bonus of 20,000 square feet would fit a 100,000 square foot building, which could be up to 100 units. That's really big. And so you could have buildings smaller than that, 80 units, 90 units, or whatever, with no site plan review. You just go in and pull a permit. I think there should be some site plan review on this. Again, it is not going to deny the project. Thank you.
I'm sorry, what size lot were you?
20,000. Well, actually, it's 19,000. If you do the math in VC3 with a bonus, you can have 104,000 square foot building. Yeah. It's a big building.
Comments from anyone? Councilor Humphrey.
Thank you, Madam President. Besides my concerns with the timing issues that the planning staff just raised about how this can really slow things down in a very expensive way for something that's going to get done anyway, what I have heard from other communities and cities around the country that really heavily emphasize site plan review is that that is the #1 factor in making all of these new development buildings look exactly the same as each other. Because in order to get through quickly and inexpensively through a site plan review process, builders will submit cookie cutter plans to every single site plan review for every property that they have. If we want to have a diversity of streetscapes and different looking buildings around the city, and that they don't all look like exactly the same building as each other, then I think that this amendment is potentially making that harder and making it a less aesthetically pleasing experience out of all of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Leary?
Thank you, Madam President. One of the concerns that I would have with that, I mean, site plan review does work well, but, you know, we have very strong underlining standards for the zoning, which we've spent nearly 3 years on, which I think are very robust. But one of the things I like about some of these zoning changes that we're going to encourage more smaller developers, a diversity of developers, not the real deep pocketed developers that we've seen build some of the larger projects. And I don't want to discourage them on this. So I think that us requiring this on all lots could be a factor. And I have to say, Councilor Humphrey's comments also, I think, are noteworthy to mention. Again, this is to create smaller diversity and more diverse units in areas near transit, near our village centers. So that's my preference to putting more density out into the neighborhoods. So I don't want to do anything that would jeopardize that.
Thank you. Councilor Wright?
So at least up in wards 3 and 2, some smaller lots, and maybe I could do a friendly amendment increasing it. But there's been, I'm thinking, 2 projects on like about 12,000 square feet. And the developer meets with the neighborhood and with the counselors. They're terrible designs, and you know, blind corners and moving things, and so they had the input from the residents and the counselors. And it's a much better project. And they did through it, and these are smaller projects through special permit. This would take away, we don't have the special permit for these, but there is some review over it. And I think we would get better projects instead of what some of the stuff that has been proposed in the past. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Oh, Councilor Crosby, sorry.
Thank you. Well, I agree with Councillor Leary about the intent behind this, this threshold. And while I might have voted for something as it was written in the amendment here, reducing the threshold from 20,000 to 15,000 square feet, I would first of all, and I want to comment on the design issue too, I would first of all worry about the length of the agenda we would be putting before the planning board. It doesn't seem reasonable to me to insert another review process into the mix in addition to the very strong design guidelines, design standards, I'm sorry, that are throughout the ordinance. Below a certain lot size, like not for all lots. That just doesn't make sense to me, so I will not support that. I need to say that I served on land use very seriously for 10 years, and I do not see that that process brings us better design, certainly not by itself, until when you talk about the design of the building, what it looks like, what, you know, somebody can always do a poor design with the best zoning ordinance. You can get somebody in there who doesn't have the skill, the talent, whatever, and they give you something that is not pretty. But until we engaged the design review, what are they called? Urban Design Commission, and began to put design standards and guidelines into our council orders. That made a difference. And when we had the Urban Design Commission take a stab more routinely, as the planning department has been doing, with many of the current planning projects that have come before the city before they come to the council, that has made a difference. But I don't agree that having more review for tiny lots is where we should be going. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright?
I'm willing to move it up to 10,000 square feet. And the architectural standards that we have, personally, I think is minimal. And one thing I've argued in ZAP was something similar to what Brookline has and what they passed. But I would move it up to 10,000 for BC2 and BC3.
So you're amending your amendment to make the floor at 10,000 square feet?
Yep.
Okay. And, pardon? And BC3, 10,000 square foot or larger?
Yeah.
Councilor
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to say that I'm listening because I can see the wisdom of this on both sides. If I end up voting against it, it would be not because I'm concerned that it will discourage developers, small or large. The city of Newton continues to be an excellent place for developers to develop because it can be extremely profitable, and that has not changed, and it's not going to change, so I'm not worried about that. But it's between my years of service on the council and the fact that I live across the street from a university, I've seen many administrative site plan reviews, and quite frankly, they don't accomplish much. It's discouraging. I always feel as though planning is inclined to go along with what's being proposed. The recommendations that they may make have no teeth. They don't have to be followed. So quite frankly, if we're going to have all of these potential projects being reviewed, that's an awful lot of staff time. And I'd prefer to see staff working on other things rather than a process that over the years, you know, has not yielded much as far as I'm concerned. So that would be why I might not support Council Wright on this amendment.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else? Have a comment? Okay, I think we can vote.
Counselor Baker.
Aye.
Counselor Bowman.
No.
Counselor Crossley.
No.
Counselor Danberg.
No.
Counselor Downs.
No.
Counselor Gentile.
No.
Counselor Greenberg.
No.
Counselor Grossman.
No.
Counselor Humphrey.
No.
Counselor Kalis.
No.
Counselor Kelly.
No.
Counselor Krinsman.
No.
Counselor Laredo.
No.
Counselor Leary.
No.
Counselor Lipoff.
No.
Counselor Lucas.
Aye.
Counselor Maliki.
Aye.
Counselor Markowitz.
No.
Counselor Noel.
No.
Counselor Norton. Counselor Norton.
I think she stepped away.
Okay. Counselor Oliver.
Aye.
Counselor Ryan.
No.
Counselor Wright.
Aye.
President Albright.
No.
Motion fails with 5 yeas, 18 nays, and 1 absent.
Thank you very much. Counselor Wright, you have one more, and this amends 9.2.5B.
Well, I have more, but that's the last one on this page. There's more amendments. This one, and maybe planning department can explain it a little bit better. So what's in there is we're requiring a minimum first floor height. And I think that's something that the developer should determine what it is, and not us telling them that it has to be at a certain height. So can you explain why that is needed and we're not relying on the developer who's going to decide how much parking they need and things like that, that they cannot figure out how high the first floor is?
Sure. So this comes down to, what is generally considered good urban design practices. When you have a strong, prominent base of a building, and then a middle and a top. So that base should be welcoming, oriented to the street. Typically, it has a little bit taller floor-to-floor height. Where I think right now we're applying it with different minimums across the board, with residential being a 12-foot minimum and the commercial being 15 feet. Where I think it really is critical is the commercial. I think you could get rid of it for residential and it wouldn't be a big loss. We do think it's nice to have a nice prominent sort of entrance to residential buildings, maybe lobby, but where you really need it is for commercial on the ground floor, and particularly where we're requiring ground floor commercial on the mixed-use priority streets. It's important that those spaces are built in a way that will be very open and welcoming and flexible and adaptable over time. Different uses are looking for different floor-to-floor heights. Restaurants often are looking for a little higher. It also depends on what sort of mechanical systems are involved. So we want to make sure these are buildings that will be successful for a long time and that will really contribute to the commercial streetscape and vitality of the village. So that's where we think it's most important for commercial uses and on the mixed-use streets.
Okay, comments on this one? Anybody online? I think then we can vote. Okay, so we're voting on removing the first floor height is what the proposal is.
Counselor Baker.
We didn't hear you?
Sorry. Thank you.
No.
Counselor Bowman.
No.
Counselor Crossley.
No.
Counselor Danberg.
No.
Counselor Downs.
No.
Counselor Gentile.
Aye.
Counselor Greenberg.
No.
Counselor Grossman. Counselor Humphrey.
No.
Counselor Kalis.
No.
Counselor Kelly.
No.
Counselor Krinsman.
No.
Counselor Laredo.
No.
Counselor Leary.
No.
Counselor Lipoff.
No.
Counselor Lucas.
Aye.
Counselor Maliki.
Aye.
Counselor Markowitz.
No.
Counselor Noel.
No.
Counselor Norton. Counselor Oliver.
No.
Counselor Ryan.
She's not there.
Thank you. Counselor Wright.
Aye.
President Albright.
No.
Motion fails, 5 yeas, 17 nays, 2 absent.
Okay. So Counselor Wright, you may have others, but let's go through this page and then come to others, okay? So the next one, Counselor Baker, is yours. It amends section 9.2.6.b, .8, .d, I.
Madam President, just reading the sections is really a technical feat in itself. Congratulations. So you all may recall that the report of the Zoning and Planning Committee for MRT units, and this is only applicable to MRT units, which are the least intense area in the whole package, that if there's new construction, there is a requirement of 1 space per unit. I thought that was a wise provision, and I support it. The point, I think, of this amendment is to say, let's have some parking requirement, but not as much for an adaptive reuse, just to make sure that we're taking care of the demand that is created, and also minimize the potential impact on abutters and the neighbors of the parking that is going to be needed to support the adaptive reuse, which can be a number of units. You can go up to 6 units, as I recall, subject to correction by the planning department. As I understand it, this amendment will not affect the town for MBTA purposes, because you could have a complete tear down and 1 unit, 1 parking space for each unit. This is a less intense requirement, so it doesn't affect the total. And I think, given the concern about parking in our residential neighborhoods, that this would be a wise addition, and I hope that the council will support it.
Thank you. Comments? Counselor Leary?
Thank you, Madam President. I guess I'd like the planning department to comment on how that additional parking space would impact our MBTA community numbers, because it seems like that would do that.
It would not. We don't count the adaptive reuse for MBTA communities. The assumption for calculating the unit capacity is that you're working with a blank slate. So it would just be the new construction that counts.
Okay, I think I was looking at the wrong page. So it's require 1 parking space for 2 units for adaptive reuse in the MRT district. Okay. Would be waivable as our current ordinance provides. Does the planning department have a comment on that?
Sure. So we have generally been recommending to let the market determine the parking. I do think we've been trying all along to make the adaptive reuse as attractive as possible, because we are fighting the underlying zoning, which allows pretty generous new single and 2-family buildings. So we really want to steer people towards the adaptive reuse wherever feasible. Adding a parking requirement, while we expect one may often be provided, there may be parcels where it's just not feasible or not feasible to fit the required minimum. So we think it helps incentivize adaptive reuse to not require parking.
Other comments? Councilor Leary?
That makes, okay, that was coming back to me now. I know I don't want to do anything that would discourage adaptive reuse. And I also know that the parking requirements could be a deal killer with that. But I just want to remind my colleagues and members of the public that it's not always the best for the city to require parking spaces because we've shown that we're not very good at figuring out how many parking spaces we actually need. But that doesn't mean that parking spaces won't be required, which is what Jen Kyra just mentioned. So I strongly believe in that. I don't think the city does a good job when it comes to deciding on how many parking spaces. And in this particular instance, where we're trying to encourage adaptive reuse, I wouldn't support it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lucas, and then Kalis, and then Crossley and Grossman, okay.
So this is essentially this is one parking spot for every 2 units, if I'm reading the amendment correctly, or it could be read as 0.5 parking spaces per one housing unit. In land use, we routinely waive the 2 parking stalls per housing unit, and we usually bring it down. I know for Austin Street was, I think, 1.5, Trio was 1.25. Those are bigger developments, and we now know that is too much underground parking. This is surface parking at 0.5. This is reasonable. This is not going to, I do not see this being as a great obstacle for developers to build housing. It's just 0.5 parking spaces per housing unit. Whenever we have the single-family attached in land use, the parking formula is anywhere from 1 parking stall or 2 parking stalls. That's what we see. And this is only 0.5. I think we should vote for this.
Thank you. Councillor Downs, I skipped you before.
Thank you, Madam President. We have a number of lovely old churches in the city, 2 of them in Woburn that I know of for sure, that are going to struggle to try to fit that in if they do smaller units in adaptive reuse, which means they would be torn down rather than adaptively reused. These churches in most of our village centers are within walking distance of services and the T. And I would think that, just as we are constantly waiving parking requirements and land use, that tells us the underlying zoning that we're constantly waiving needs to be fixed. And I would urge my colleagues to think about letting the market decide on parking here so that we can keep some of those older buildings and keep our villages walkable. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kalis.
Yeah, I think Councillor Downs makes a very good point, and I think we want to make adaptive reuse as creatively possible as it can be. My question through the chair to Councillor Baker would be, is 2 units a magic number, or could that be 4 units? I just think the fewer restrictions, the better.
I don't have any magic, so I'm not entirely wedded to the idea. I'm just trying to pick a number that's easy to manage for the situation. I would point out that the church situation that Councillor Downs was pointing out is precisely where there are multiple units, and it's the kind of context where a waiver would be appropriate. It would be a conversation that could occur, and we could do it. We're really trying to take care in this situation, though. This is MRTs, remember. We're not talking about VCs. We're talking about MRTs. We're talking about the areas that are closest to existing residential properties. And we're just trying to minimize the impact on those particular neighborhoods by the adaptive reuse. But the adaptive reuse can still go forward. There are lots of incentives to do that anyway. So I hope that the council might consider this. I mean, we can work with numbers, but I'm trying to do something that's relatively easy to manage. And again, it's a waivable requirement just as it currently is. But I think the point is not to depend on the market completely in this context. We certainly don't for new construction. So I think we ought to try and make sure that we provide some protection when it's an adaptive reuse. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor Crossley's next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that explanation about the waivable provision, because that's where I was going to go. I think it's a reasonable amendment if it's waivable according to how the VCOD is structured. And I think I think it should be made clear to people, or if through the chair you would like to make it clear, when you say waivable as our current ordinance provides, I think you're referring to the special permit waiver. And what we had in the VCOD was a waivable by the planning board.
Because this is all part of the MBTA, I'm comfortable with that clarification.
Maybe you should, can you, I'm going to ask the clerk to add that. So, Councilor Baker, could you state it again?
Councilor Baker, could you state that for clarification?
Sorry, the waivability, as Councilor Crosby properly points out, we have a current arrangement in the city where if you have a parking requirement under current zoning, you go to get a special permit, or not really a special permit, you get a waiver from the Land Use Committee through our conventional process. In the proposal for the VCOD districts, there is a parking requirement that is waivable by the planning board. And what she's asking is, would that process apply to this particular waiver? And the answer would be yes.
So I could change the ending to this parking requirement would be waivable through our planning board?
Through, as the VCOD process provides.
Okay, Councilor Grossman.
Thank you, and thank you for this amendment. I think it's an interesting question for us to consider. So I, in general, embrace the idea of the market determining our parking requirements. Where I get stuck is in the very passionate debates we've had recently over what our parking rules citywide in general are and are going to be, and whether overnight parking year-round or in shorter periods of time is going to be permissible. And for that reason, and given what I see as a really divided question, I'm just interested. I don't know if the planning department is in a position to comment, or if some of my colleagues who really study these questions carefully are in a position to comment. How do you expect that this would play out differently in each scenario under our current ordinances, where you can't park your car overnight on the street year-round versus if that were to go away?
Do you have a comment for that?
That's a good question. Today there are many homes that do not have enough parking for the vehicles that they own. Right? You have single-family homes that have more cars than their driveway or garages fit all throughout the city. They find a way, they park their car somewhere else, they get a permit from the city to park in public lots in the winter. So I would expect it would be similar. Typically, though, for these sorts of units, you're going to attract people who are comfortable with the parking situation that's provided. So if you are buying a condo or renting a unit and it doesn't come with parking, that's typically more attractive to someone that is not bringing a car, or has made arrangements to rent a space to put their car elsewhere. If the winter parking ban was overturned, you could see potentially more people, people could park their car on the street. You could, if that becomes untenable for some reason, there are tools to deal with that with permit parking districts in order to control how many cars are parking on those streets. But in general, you're not going to see every lot on a street be converted into adaptive reuse. I think it's probably limited circumstances where, in each small neighborhood where it really can work. So you may get a few extra cars around. It's not big apartment building in the middle of a single-family residential neighborhood.
Councilor Grossman.
Thank you. Then colleagues, I'm inclined to support this amendment that Councilor Baker put forward. While I totally understand theoretically what you're saying, I tried to make this comment in PS&T a few weeks ago, and I don't think I chose my words to describe what I was saying very well. But in my experience, we do have quite a number of scenarios where folks purchase or rent a home in the city and haven't necessarily made arrangements about what their parking situation is going to be, and that's gotten really tricky. Where they then approach us and would like us to solve that problem, and we're not able to help them. So for that reason, as well as the other reasons that were implied in the question that I asked to begin with, I'm going to support the amendment by my colleague from Ward 7. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rado.
So, Councilor Grossman stole my thunder here, because I agree with exactly what she said, and you'll recall, colleagues, the number of emails we've received from folks who said, I rented a place and I didn't realize I didn't have a place to park. And that's the rationale for lifting the winter parking ban. So as much as we all think that everybody who comes into our community knows what the parking situation is, that's clearly not the case. That's number one. Number two, we hope that when people come here, their situations may change. And we don't want to necessarily force them to have to move to another location in the city, either if they're renting or they've purchased a property. So it seems to me that Councilor Baker's amendment is quite reasonable. It's not overreaching. I share the concerns of those on land use when we've routinely granted parking waivers, but that's not this type of situation. This is a very low threshold. So I think this is reasonable, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? I think Councilor Baker? No, I think we can vote.
Councilor Baker.
Aye.
Councilor Bowman.
No.
Councilor Crossley.
Aye.
Councilor Danberg.
No.
Councilor Downs.
No.
Councilor Gentile.
Aye.
Councilor Greenberg. No. Councilor Grossman.
Aye.
Councilor Humphrey.
No.
Councilor Kalis.
Aye.
Councilor Kelly.
No.
Councilor Krinsman.
No.
Councilor Laredo.
Aye.
Councilor Leary.
Aye.
Councilor Lippoff.
Aye.
Councilor Lucas.
Aye.
Excuse me, Councilor Leary, were you an aye or a nay? You were an aye. Yeah. Councilor Maliki.
Aye.
Councilor Markowitz.
Aye.
Councilor Noel.
Nay.
Councilor Norton.
Aye.
Councilor Oliver.
Aye.
Councilor Ryan.
No.
Councilor Wright.
Aye.
President Albright.
Aye.
Motion carries with 15 yeas and 9 nays.
Okay, Councilor Baker, you are up again on another parking issue. This one amends 9.2.6.C.1.
So, Madam President, let me just explain there are two different categories of parking issues that we're trying to deal with. We recognize that for properties within what are called the MBTA compliance, which are the original villages you read off, I have two amendments that would not apply to them. They would only apply if we had areas beyond that scope, because they're beyond half a mile of mass transit. And so those are two amendments that, in effect, will only be applicable if we have the whole package of various villages included. So I'm wondering, in the interest of saving time, we might take item 8 and 9 and just hold them until we see what the result is, rather than adopt something that turns out to not be necessary. But we can, that might be just a procedural matter to save time.
So are you suggesting holding 7, 8, and 9, all of them?
I think we, 7, I'd like to talk about, but, and explain, but I might defer to other changes first, because I think it has the biggest impact on our potential count. So I would not want to have the opportunity for other things precluded by that specific one, but let me just explain it. The first item would be to say, one of the boundary issues we're trying to figure out is, again, the interface with the properties which are converted to VC 2 and 3, which, as you know, this is in a sense, a redevelopment ordinance, and the existing project or existing property is changed, and new properties are built in their place. If they're adjacent to a residential zone, then the question is, what happens to the parking in those situations? If it's in the village center, so it's far away from a residential zone, then this particular amendment would not apply and would not affect that situation. But in those boundary situations, I think it's wise. And the problem is, for purposes of the count, my understanding from I can't read my phone and the paper at the same time, but Mr. Lamel has calculated a rough number of impacts of that, and I recall it was several hundred. Do you recall, Mr. Lamel, what on the order, or Ms. Cara?
It was approximately 840. This is a bit of a tricky one to calculate easily, though. But we got approximately 840 units lost.
That's a big chunk of the 9,180. So I'm going to suggest we hold all 3 of these until we see what other amendments pass and see what kind of capacity we have to reduce the 9,180 to a lower number. And this might be one vehicle, which I think also accomplishes the objective of protecting the residential boundary areas, which we'd like to do if we can. So
Councilor Baker, we're coming to the end of the text amendments. I think Councilor Gentile might have some, and Councilor Wright has a few. Do you want to wait until?
Yeah, I'm going to wait till they're done, if
and I'll
that's
come
right.
back to you. Okay.
Is that okay?
Yep.
It's just that I appreciate the department putting all these things together and gave a chance to explain them.
Okay, so Councilor Gentile, you sent some amendments this afternoon. Some of them are actually duplicative of things we've already talked about. Let me get into my computer. Maybe the planning department, do you have Councilor Gentile's amendments that he sent this afternoon? And if so, could you comment on them, which ones we've already talked about? Do you have his? Councilor Gentile, do we have the right thing up on the screen?
Yes.
Yes. So we voted on so far 2A, 2B. I believe that's it.
2A and 2B.
Okay. So why don't we start with, well, we talked about the maximum height of the first floor. Oh, you're setting it at 16 feet.
We talked about the minimum first floor height. I believe this is the maximum.
Do we have a maximum now?
We do not. We have an overall maximum height and we have a maximum number of stories, but we left flexibility in how that is distributed, as some uses may need a taller floor to floor, but we do not have a maximum first floor height.
Okay, Councilor Gentile, would you like to speak to your number 1 amendment there?
Yeah, first, I just wanted to make people aware that the origin of a lot of these amendments came from one of the architects groups that have been following the process quite diligently and have made some recommendations to us over time. So I just felt strongly that some of them, not all, should at least be heard in the full council and, debated and voted on. I think it's a courtesy that at the very least we should extend to the group, seeing how much time they've been putting in. So the first one, I was under the impression that the maximum height of the first floor as proposed is 18 feet, but I think I just heard Ms. Kyra say that there is no maximum.
That's correct. A previous version had a maximum first floor height. However, those were really unnecessary as there's an overall maximum height, so you still can't exceed the number of stories or the maximum height, whichever one ends up being lower.
All right, so the point that was made by the architects is, I believe, simply was that there should be a maximum height because these are our village centers. The first floor should have a maximum height as opposed to a commercial area at a mall or something where, the first floor might be substantially higher, but to try and keep the feel and aesthetic look of our village centers, the recommendation is for a maximum height on the first floor of 16 feet. I believe, again, I was told that there's a current maximum in place of 15 feet, so that would increase it by a foot. It'd be a little bit more generous. And
Yeah, I don't think there is a maximum, Councilor Gentile.
There's a minimum, and in commercial areas it's 15. There is no maximum currently in the draft ordinance.
so there's a minimum of 15? No, I'm talking about our current zoning.
Our current zoning does not have a maximum, so this council not so long ago voted to sort of disconnect floor-to-floor heights and stories in order to allow more flexibility, to allow the sort of taller first floor, to allow other commercial uses, as long as you're not exceeding the overall building height or number of stories.
Okay, so I guess the point that folks were trying to make is that the current practice is that first floor heights are typically 14 to 15 feet in our commercial centers, and that it would make sense to have a max of 16 feet to try and keep our village centers more like village centers as opposed to urban malls.
Okay.
And I thought that made sense, which is why I proposed the amendment.
Okay, Councilor Grossman and then Bowman.
Just a question for the planning department. Can you give us some examples of what kinds of uses would need more than 16 feet that you might expect that we would get in this new ordinance?
Typically restaurants.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Bowman.
So as a former banker out of college, can tell you some of the most iconic and beautiful buildings in village centers frequently had soaring ceilings, and then were later turned into beautiful spaces, be it restaurants or otherwise. I really don't think we need to have a maximum story height on the first floor. I think there are lots of good uses. If you go into downtown areas that had what I want to say, like an old time big store, those are going to be much higher. Those are going to be more in the 18 to 20 foot high, and they're quite beautiful and they fit alongside shorter storied buildings next door. I just think we've got a lot of amendments to go through, and I would suggest we go ahead and call this question.
Okay. Is there any debating on calling the question?
No, we're good, yeah. You ready?
Well, there actually,
you can
object to that.
And we can vote on it.
And we can vote on that, but if there's no objection, we'll go ahead with it.
Councilor Baker.
Aye.
Counselor Bowman.
No.
Counselor Crossley.
No.
Counselor Danberg.
No.
Counselor Downs.
No.
Counselor Gentile.
Aye.
Counselor Greenberg.
No.
Counselor Grossman.
No.
Counselor Humphrey.
No.
Counselor Kalis.
No.
Counselor Kelly.
No.
Counselor Krinsman.
No.
Counselor Laredo.
No.
Counselor Leary.
No.
Counselor Lipoff.
No.
Counselor Lucas.
No.
Counselor Maliki.
Aye.
Counselor Markowitz. Counselor Noel.
No.
Counselor Norton.
Aye.
Counselor Oliver.
No.
Counselor Ryan.
No.
Counselor Wright.
No.
President Albright.
No.
Motion fails, 4 yeas, 20 nays.
Okay. Counselor Gentile, I think your next one is 2C.
Yes, so the next one, A and B were already voted and
Yep.
were already discussed and voted on. So C is that in the MRT zones, the maximum sloped roof height, is currently proposed at 40 feet is my understanding. In our current ordinances, I'm told that this maximum sloped roof height is 36 feet, and this is calling for a compromise in the middle of a height restriction of 38 feet.
Planning Department, do you have comments on this one?
Sure, so the current ordinance, the maximum pitch roof height of 36 feet is applying to single and two-family buildings. The MRT is a bit different. This is meant to be that transition from the lower density neighborhoods to the core of the village center and allowing for more units. So because we are trying to make sure that you can fit 3 or 4 units, or up to 6 if you're doing adaptive reuse with an addition, we want to make sure that there's usable space on that in that half story, that you really can fit some living space in there. We've heard concerns from the opposite side of this through the process, that we were worried that we wouldn't be able to fit a typical sort of fourplex. We've done some of that analysis and have showed that we can, but you really need to maximize sort of every inch of that. It's a very small footprint building, 1,500 square feet, 2.5 stories. I think that 2 feet really helps.
Thank you. Any comments on this one? Counselor Crossley?
Just one. We love our Victorian buildings in the city of Newton. Architect Henry Finch, who's a friend of mine, I think many of the architects on this know him, he would frequently remind us that at the turn of the century, when more Victorians or the late 1800s were coming in, people thought them ostentatious and too big, and they fought against them. None of our Victorian houses could be built today under our current ordinances, and actually not even not with a 40-foot limit. The Victorians you see, the beautiful ones lining Lincoln Street in Newton Highlands, none of them could be built even under this set of metrics. So I hope that we do not pass this item.
Okay. Any other comments? If not, we'll vote on this one.
So this is the maximum slope
Yes.
roof height of
38 feet, right.
Thank you. Counselor Baker.
No.
Counselor Bowman.
No.
Counselor Crossley. Counselor Danberg.
No.
Counselor Downs.
No.
Counselor Gentile.
Aye.
Counselor Greenberg.
No.
Counselor Grossman.
No.
Counselor Humphrey.
No.
Counselor Kalis.
No.
Counselor Kelly.
No.
Counselor Krinsman.
No.
Counselor Laredo.
No.
Counselor Leary.
No.
Counselor Lipoff.
No.
Counselor Lucas.
No.
Counselor Maliki. Counselor Markowitz.
No.
Counselor Noel.
No.
Counselor Norton.
No.
Counselor Oliver.
No.
Counselor Ryan. Counselor Wright. President Albright.
No.
Motion fails 1 yea, 23
Okay.
nays.
Thank you. Councilor Gentile. 2D.
So 2D is to allow that the square footage for the first two floors combined to be 3,000 square feet. This is actually designed to provide a little bit more flexibility, as I understand it. Our current footprint is 1,500 square feet. And right now, and then we could be creating a situation where you're encouraging boxes, as I understand it, if the next story is 1,500 square feet. So the thinking being that if you combine the first two floors for a little bit more flexibility, you might get better design, so that you might, the first floor footprint might be, I don't know, 1,750 square feet, and then the second floor could be the difference between that and 3,000 square feet. I thought it made sense to, as they say, create a little bit more flexibility, but that's the rationale.
Thank you. Planning, do you have a comment on this one?
This one adds, I think, maybe some unnecessary complexity. While it could create some scenarios where you either had a larger first floor, but then for whatever reason weren't stacking above that, or you had a second floor that extended out. I think when you're thinking this style of building is going to look very similar to a house. You know, your 2.5-story house, it's just going to house a few more units. Those are typically stacked. Your first floor and your second floor, you know, typically being the same floor plate. There's some efficiency there as well, particularly in utilities and, you know, HVAC. So I don't know that this is necessary, and it does introduce complexity into the ordinance. We'd have to redefine how this is measured and how building footprint applies in MRT, and I think in most cases you end up in the same place.
Councilor Lucas, and then Baker, then Kalis.
Thank you, President Albright. Just to be clear, for all these amendments that you see on the screen, 2A through 2D, these are all for the MRT zones, not VC2 or VC3. I'm a little confused on this one, just mainly due to the fact that how would this apply to adaptive reuse? Yeah, it just seems, as what planning said, it seems burdensome. So I'm a little confused on this one, so I'm leaning no, mainly due to how this would apply for adaptive reuse. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Baker?
I just need a little clarification on the planning department. My memory is that MRT, there's a limit of 1,500 square feet on the ground floor, right? So if you're saying you have 1,500 on the ground floor limit, and then you can go another 1,500 on top for a limit of 3,000, I'm not sure we've gained very much. What would worry me is that you might end up with a toadstool where you didn't intend one. Somebody did 1,000 square feet on the bottom and then 2,000 square feet on the top. And while I grant Councilor Crosley has talked about Victorians, I'm not sure this is the outcome that she was thinking about. So while I'm very respectful of the architects and the work that's gone into this, I admire them immensely. I'm not sure I can vote for this in the current framework because 1,500 is the base number. If it were a bigger number, then I could see a limit like 3,000. But where it's really not gaining anything but potentially creating a design incentive that I don't think is wise, I'm not sure I would support that.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Kalis.
On the contrary, I find this interesting, and I want to ask, so is the first floor required to be 1,500 currently?
It's a maximum.
It's a maximum. So you could have 1,200 and then 1,600. It's just a, you couldn't?
Well, so the way the building footprint is actually written is it's sort of the outline of the larger story. So if you had a smaller, say you had, 1,200 for whatever reason on the first floor and 1,500 on the second floor, your building footprint would be 1,500.
I see. I guess, I mean, the point of this is to try to eliminate in the MRT zones just the same footprint, house by house by house. And this doesn't seem to do it. I wonder if within the, I mean, I'm not as close to this, but within the plant, the MRT zone, are there already parameters to make sure that doesn't happen?
There's the adaptive reuse, where you do get a larger footprint. And again, the intent here was really incentivizing the adaptive reuse and where possible sort of steering people that direction. So you do get to take your existing footprint and add up to 50% to that for adaptive reuse. So those will vary quite a bit depending on the existing house size. Oh, sorry, one more thing. There's also architectural features that are exempt from the footprint, that things like front porches, bay windows, that will add variety and design interest through the MRT.
Councilor Crossley.
Thank you. I was going to pick up on the architectural features, but also remind everyone, we have an awful lot of 1920 era colonial homes in the city that have been replicated over and over and over. And I think generally people think of them as stately and fine homes. So with the addition of, if people want to do bay windows or box windows or open front porches or screen porches or dormers, there can be variation on the theme. So I know the other architects group, the one who worked with us for most of the time we were working and weighed in heavily and with constructive criticism on many of the things we were doing, actually wanted a bigger building. That's why I think planning looked carefully at how many units can you fit into a building with a 1,500 square foot footprint, which was really what was driving that and wanting to advantage adaptive reuse. So I don't think we're going to get very many of them in neighborhoods where we have quality building stock that can be used and renewed.
Thank you. Councilor Wright.
Thank you. I would like to do a friendly amendment to this. And this is giving the developer more choices, so we won't get boxes all the time. Yes, we'll get colonials, but now you're giving them some more variety. So I think what we should say is the first floor is between 1,500 and 2,000 for a maximum of 3,000 between the two floors. So we don't get the mushroom, but we'll get more this way. So Councilor Gentile, I'd like to modify it to that.
Can you restate your modification?
So in order not to get a mushroom where you're top heavy, is to allow 1,500 to 2,000 square feet on the first floor, but a maximum of 3,000 square feet on the two floors. So you could have 2,000 on the first floor and 1,000 on the second. So that's giving you a little bit more variety of the tear downs that you're going to get. You won't get boxes every time. Thank you.
Can I just get planning to comment on that? And if Councilor Baker.
So just to the box point, these are required to have a pitched roof. So these will look like your typical homes for the most part. They're not going to be just a straight box. I don't know. Again, I think this is adding complexity where it's not really needed. If you would go to 2,000 square feet on the first floor, but you're limited to 3,000 between those two floors, that then means that that upper story, that half story, is now limited to that 1,000, unless you get a weird building that then comes hourglass sort of that comes back out. And again, we're wanting to make sure that upper floor you can get some usable living space. That's the way to make this work with 3 to 4 units. So I think you just end up with a building typology that doesn't really work.
Madam Chair, can I respond to some of these comments?
Sure, but why don't we let Councilor Baker speak and then you can speak again.
Very much glad to hear what Councilor Gentile has to say. I'm cautious about Councilor Wright's proposal because one of the, I think, valuable features of the 1,500 square feet is it does, I think, disincentive tear downs because you got an adaptive reuse, which is a bigger opportunity. I wouldn't want to necessarily create a large footprint that someone then decides to tear down and occupy more of the lot because we didn't get the extra open space, and I don't want to lose that. So I'm cautious about this. I'm open to persuasion. I'm glad to hear what Councilor Gentile says.
Councilor Gentile, do you want to respond?
Yeah, so first, I don't understand the complexity argument. I don't see what's so complex about this suggestion. I think it's pretty straightforward. And people understand all it. And nobody is being required to do anything. So, you know, we often hear it, like, especially with parking, is that, you know, developers know best. So all that this is saying is, you know, you've got 3,000 square feet to use between 2 floors, and there may be a lot or a design that makes sense that doesn't automatically tell the developer that the first floor can be a maximum of 1,500 square feet. You've got 3,000 square feet to use over 2 floors. You know, as I said earlier, maybe you want the first floor to be 1,700 square feet, and you've got a nice design that only requires the second floor to use up 1,300 or 1,200. So I don't see this as being some kind of a radical suggestion, complex, and, you know, forcing people into doing anything. It's none of those things. It's designed to give some flexibility to the developers.
Ms. Carr, do you have a comment?
I just want to respond to the complexity and explain what I mean by adding complexity. Right now, this ordinance is controlling buildings by building footprint. We spent a lot of time developing and refining that building footprint definition to try and make sure there aren't loopholes to it. So it's not just the first floor area. It's taking sort of the outline of the building envelope at its largest point. And, you know, we have provisions in there about what is exempt from that, what is included, making sure that you can't get around it with some sort of cantilever on an upper floor or a big parking deck. This is a different way of controlling building size. I'm not sure what the 3,000 between the 2 floors is, because that's no longer how we define building footprint. Is it floor area? Is it subject to our existing ordinance definition of floor area and what counts and what's exempt? How is that upper story controlled then? Because right now it's sort of the outline of the largest story. If we're only controlling the area inside the first 2 floors, I don't see what the control is for that upper floor. This is what I mean by complexity. It just is a deviation from how the ordinance is currently measuring building envelope.
Councilor Wright.
So, again, I think we define what the third floor is. To me, it just seems pretty simple, you know, especially if we qualify it as the first floor can be between 1,500 and 2,000, and the second floor is the total between the first and second is 3,000. Where I can see it, again, a weird shaped lot, or if you want some units with just on the first floor, and you don't have the stairs, so it'd be better for people who can't do the stairs or whatever. So it just gives you flexibility. Will this be used? Probably hardly ever, but we'd like to allow some flexibility in the design of their buildings.
Okay, Councilor Crossley. Councilor Crossley, oh, you have a couple of minutes. Go ahead.
I don't need them. So I think this is not a necessary amendment, that you are, as Councilor Wright just said, hardly ever going to even encounter anything that would need such a, such quote-unquote flexibility, and that we should vote the item.
Okay, are you calling the question?
So, can I respond to one more point? I mean, we're gonna get into calling the question now all night. I thought that this was gonna be peace and harmony.
Please go ahead.
So, I'm assuming that this is, you know, new construction, and I'm also assuming that, I mean, we do have setback requirements even in the MRT zones, correct?
Yes.
All right, so those restrictions are still in place. I thought Council Wright just made a good point that maybe you would have a lot where you wanted to have mostly single floor living, and so you would want a bigger footprint. And as long as it meets all of the setback requirements, I don't see where that should be such a threatening or terrible thing. So, again, it gives the flexibility, but anyway, I guess it's time to vote.
Okay, but Councilor Downs would like to speak.
I just have a question for planning. Isn't the current maximum footprint in MRT now for new construction 1,500 square feet? How do we get to 2,000?
I believe that was an amendment from Councilor Wright.
This would change that.
So it would change it to allowing an even larger footprint when we were just arguing about green space and trying to get to a higher number for green space or usable open space.
Well,
In that case, I don't think this makes sense.
you would still have to comply with setbacks, green space, all of that.
Okay, Councilor Crossley, Councilor Wright. Are you all set, Councilor Downs?
I am, thanks.
Okay.
We have to remember that MRT is an optional zone. The underlying zoning still is there and would allow, if there's room on a site, for someone to have a 2,000 or a 3,000 square foot footprint and have single floor living in case they want to build an accessible home or for whatever reason. MRT zone has to be at least 3 units, so the more you spread it out on the site, and units aren't all going to be 800 square feet, you know, then you lose that opportunity. So you either have the underlying zoning where you can spread it out, or you have the new zoning, and we want to advantage the adaptive reuse. We've talked about this in committee over and over and over, or I should say extensively. I just hope we could vote this item.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Wright, and then maybe we can vote. Oh, Councilor Wright, you need to ask for more time. Would you like another minute?
Yes, another minute.
Councilor Wright would like another minute. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
I'm having a hard time seeing why this is so difficult. Again, we want a variety, we want people to think outside the box. You still got your setbacks, and just like you didn't want to put more open space in that, saying we already have enough green space and for trees, you still have all of that. So it doesn't matter. If it's a very small lot, they're not going to be able to do it. And the total volume is still going to be that 3,000 square feet plus your third floor. So the volume of the building is not changing. Thank you.
Okay, I think Councilor Leary.
Thank you, Madam President. I was, intrigued by this initially because I'm all in for the idea of more diversity. And listening to all the arguments to and from, and the fact that this probably will hardly ever be used, and because I'm all for peace and harmony, I'll support it.
That makes me feel better.
Councilor Baker.
I yield to no one in my desire for peace and harmony. However, I would just say that part of the reason I can support this is that this is for new construction, not for adaptive reuse. And we're trying not to have new construction dominate in these contexts. Making it easier to do that seems to me encourage tear downs, which is not what I want to go to. So I'm going to maintain support the existing rule.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to vote. Let's call the roll.
Counselor Baker.
No.
Counselor Bowman.
No.
Counselor Crossley.
No.
Counselor Danberg.
No.
Counselor Downs.
No.
Counselor Gentile.
Aye.
Counselor Greenberg.
No.
Counselor Grossman.
No.
Counselor Humphrey.
No.
Counselor Kalis.
No.
Counselor Kelly.
No.
Counselor Krinsman.
No.
Counselor Laredo.
No.
Counselor Leary.
Aye.
Counselor Lipoff.
No.
Counselor Lucas.
No.
Counselor Maliki.
No.
Counselor Markowitz.
Aye.
Counselor Noel.
No.
Counselor Norton.
Aye.
Counselor Oliver.
Aye.
Counselor Ryan.
No.
Counselor Wright.
Aye.
President Albright.
No.
Motion fails, 6 yeas, 18 nays.
Okay. Counselor Gentile, your next one is a change in some wording for the design guidelines.
Right. So number 3 on the list, I am told that originally in the first version of this zoning reform, that there was language regarding building design guidelines. And it read building entrances for buildings with residential uses on the ground floor, only the ground floor, fronting a public right-of-way, individual unit entrances are required. So I am making the motion that that language be returned.
Mr. Lamella, will you be able to speak to that?
Sure. So this was included in one of the earlier versions, I think version 1.0. This was done as it related to accessibility. Accessible units and accessibility is handled in the building code. And the thinking behind removing it was that given that the requirements related to accessibility are there, it did make sense to be in zoning. Removing the requirement doesn't prevent something like this from happening. If someone wanted to do townhomes where the ground floor units had individual entrances, they still could. If someone wanted to do an apartment building where they wanted to have individual entrances for the ground floor units, they still could. But we didn't want to prevent something like a common lobby. Where there were, 4 or 5 units on the ground floor, if that was what was desired.
Comments from the council? Councilor Bowman.
So thank you very much. This is not one that makes sense to me. I did have the architects reach out to me and talk to me about this particular item. And what comes to mind is the project that was approved at Oakley Spa. And I do understand that there was support from some councilors to have those individual townhouse type entrances along Washington Street, but it certainly complicated, when you looked at the overall project, complicated the flow within the building. It limited really how the building could be faced and used along Washington Street. It privatized the front area of the apartment building along Washington Street and the sort of grassy common area to belong to the 3 units that face that, as opposed to being usable for the whole apartment. That just doesn't seem to make sense. I don't really understand why we would want to do that. I mean, certainly if somebody has a design that makes sense, but to require them to do that, it certainly seems to... I think about all the beautiful apartment buildings, the older apartment buildings in Brookline, and just how they have that, usually have a nice space carved out front that would just encourage people to sit and be, and maybe they're waiting for their Uber or a friend or just watching people walk by. And I would just hate to sort of privatize that area or require it to be done. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody online? No. Okay, I guess we can vote on this one.
Counselor Baker. Oh, sorry. Counselor Bowman.
No.
Counselor Crossley.
No.
Counselor Danberg.
No.
Counselor Downs.
No.
Counselor Gento.
Aye.
Counselor Greenberg. No. Counselor Grossman.
No.
Counselor Humphrey.
No.
Counselor Kalis.
No.
Counselor Kelly. Excuse me.
No.
Counselor Krinsman.
No.
Counselor Laredo.
No.
Counselor Leary.
No.
Counselor Lipoff.
No.
Counselor Lucas.
No.
Counselor Maliki. Counselor Markowitz.
No.
Counselor Noel.
No.
Counselor Norton.
No.
Counselor Oliver. Counselor Ryan. Counselor Wright.
No.
President Albright.
No.
Motion fails. 1 yea, 21 nays, 2 absent.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Gentile, your next one is about the spec.
I know what the next one is next.
Okay, go ahead. But we've sort of, well, I guess Counselor Wright withdrew her amendment, so go ahead.
So number 4 is, it lowers the threshold as to when a special permit would be required from 30,000 square feet to 20,000 square feet. But it's been mentioned to me that this might eliminate a number of units that we are currently counting on to comply with the MBTA Communities Act. So if that is the case, if that is what planning indicates, then I would just simply withdraw this.
Okay, go on to number 5.
No, is that the case?
That is the case.
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, so then the last one is, my understanding is that we have a very specific definition of a half-story, and the only suggestion here is that that definition be included in the text for the this rezoning, just so that it's clear that what a half story is, and so there's nothing left to doubt as to it being the same half story definition that we currently have in our zoning ordinances. So it's just meant to, again, just to be a little bit more specific as to the definition of a half story, even in these overlay districts.
Ms. Cara?
There is a half-story definition in the overlay district, as well as a diagram of how that half-story is measured. It is different than the definition that you referenced that's from elsewhere in the ordinance that applies to single and two-family buildings. It was crafted specifically for this ordinance. It's looking at either in the VC2, VC3, a step back at the upper story or a pitched roof, and it's controlling the angle of the roof and the maximum height of that upper story, or in the MRT it has to be that pitched roof. And this is partly, again, to ensure that there is a usable space, but you do get the appearance of that half story.
Councilor Rader.
So I just want to understand from the planning department exactly what the differences are here. So let me try to paraphrase what my understanding is. You could tell me if I'm correct or incorrect. Under our current ordinance, the concept of a flat half story doesn't exist. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
All right, so what we're really doing here is adding an extra story, except that top story, if it's flat, just has to have some setback. Is that right?
That's correct. The pitch definition is also different.
No, I want to get to that in a moment, but I want to understand what we're talking about here. So this is a pretty, in my mind, a pretty dramatic change from what we currently have. We really are saying that this, what has been referred to repeatedly as a half story, I mean, it could be 3/4 or more of the area of space, depending on the building, right?
It typically works out to about 2/3, which is actually the same as this definition.
All right, but it could be greater if the building was larger, right?
Potentially, or if there was some exemption from that setback at the upper story. But typically when we've done our analysis and done test fits, it comes out to about 2/3.
All right, but 2/3 of all flat space is really different than 2/3 of pitched space, right?
Well, the 2/3 here is of the story below, which is of flat space.
Again, I just want to understand, and forgive me if I'm not being clear. It's 2/3 of the lower story, but all of that space is with a flat roof. So it's all usable, right?
Correct, it's all usable. It would be a lower height too than if it's a pitched roof.
I understand that. If it's a pitched roof, can you just walk us through what the differences are between the current, what exists in the current ordinance and what's being proposed here?
Yeah, so the current ordinance is limiting it to a ceiling height of 7 feet. The current ordinance, it doesn't really intend that upper story to be usable space. It's generally an attic space in a single-family home. This is meant to allow an actual usable space with units on that upper story, but to give the appearance of less bulk from the street because it's set back or pitched.
So, forgive me, but I've sat through a lot of land use meetings, and we've had 2.5-story buildings, residential buildings, where that third floor is occupied. And we have a lot of buildings in the city where that 2.5 stories with the pitched roof, that third floor is occupied. It can be a bedroom, it can be a playroom, it can be offices. So I think you said that the third floor in the current ordinance does not lead to usable space, but in fact it does, right?
I didn't say that exactly. A ceiling height of 7 feet is relatively low. You could have, people do use those spaces, but they often are intended as attic spaces. And you're also you're comparing single-family homes to apartment buildings. What you see today in new mixed-use and residential, apartment and condo buildings is a flat roof, but it can be the full width of the story below. This is pulling it back in.
So we're clear here, this definition of half-story, though, would be in residential buildings in the MRT zone too, right?
The residential buildings must have a pitched roof. They cannot do the flat.
But it's a different definition of pitch than we currently have.
Correct, because it's trying to fit 3 to 4 units in a building with a relatively small footprint. So it's trying to balance the overall size of the building and the footprint and the open space on the lot with making sure you can actually fit the 3 or 4 units in there. And that means using that upper story.
So you're getting a taller building then, right? Than what's currently allowed, essentially?
40 feet versus the 36 feet.
Okay. I appreciate the information. That's helpful. Thank you.
Councilor Crossley.
Thank you. For some reason, this definition has flummoxed people all the way through. Forever, at least in my lifetime, there has been this definition in our existing code that defines a half-story as usable space no more than 2/3 of the story below. And the pitched roof may be any pitch, but it may not peak higher than 36 feet. In the new code, exactly what Ms. Kyra said, and you're right, Councilor Laredo, people do try to use their attic spaces more and more today as they're trying to expand gently and less expensively their living area with dormers and so forth. But in the new code, getting that extra, little bit of extra height, it's just to the pitch of the roof, to peak of the roof, not anywhere else. In the business district, this is, the newness of this has a reason. The reason, what's that? Don't worry about it. I know I didn't go 3 minutes. Anyway, the reason for it is so because as you experience a streetscape, walking along the street, and there are many examples of this, you generally don't experience the height of a building above the top of the first of the last full story. So setting the next story back or pitching the roof is a way to mitigate that appearance of bulk and mass. And that's what this half-story definition is, but it's really typical in zoning codes to call out a half-story when you're trying to get a variation in roof shapes and to define it. And that's all this is. In Waban, when we presented, somebody asked the question about what is a half-story, defined it, and somebody said, oh, so it doesn't mean that you have to walk like this. It's not half the height. We know that. It's a percentage of the area below as defined by the metrics that are in this. And for most of the buildings, it does come to be around 2/3. But let's just be flexible about it.
Okay. Anybody else? Councilor Bowman, and then Councilor Gentile.
So it seems to me that the most important thing about this is not how much usable space is on the third floor. It's really about consistency, the goal of, and the look from the outside, right? Do we really care if it's 2/3 or 2/3 plus 20 feet or 2/3? Like, we don't really care about that. We really care about what it looks like on the outside. So I remember being impressed about this, about the pitch and requiring the pitch roof and having a pitch. And I think that's why I would not support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Gentile.
So I did not get the complete story on this, so I would just like the opportunity to do a little bit more homework on it, and just, if we could just hold it for now. I assume that I'll probably come back and ask that it just be withdrawn, but I'd just like the opportunity to look into it a little bit further.
Okay, we can hold this for you. I don't know if we'll be able to finish everything else tonight or not, but there is that possibility that this might be the only thing. We'll see.
If it's the only thing, then I would end up withdrawing it.
Okay, well, let's see how it goes. Councilor Wright, do you have more amendments that you'd like to make? Do you have anything written up that we could show them on the screen?
The map amendments.
No, let's not. Let's finish the text amendments because Councilor Baker has it.
Let me just look real quick.
Oh. Councilor Gentile, could you lower your hand? Thank you. You're all set. Okay, Councilor Baker, we're back to you.
Okay, so there, I think I'm going to take them in somewhat reverse order, just as contingencies. The two amendments on the planning department document that's noted at 8 and 9. These are really just an attempt to try and look at those areas that are not part of the MBTA compliance area. The MBTA compliance area is built around the premise that you're close enough to mass transit that your parking needs will be more limited than they will be in other parts of the city. But the other parts of the city that are covered by these other VC districts do not have that same access. So it seemed to me reasonable to think about having a limited parking requirement in those contexts. So I want to be clear, we're not talking about anything affecting the count for purposes of the state compliance, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So this would just be picking up on the last parking amendment we literally passed in this council, which related to, of all things, breweries. And, but it was a limited amount of required parking. It was a compromise that was worked out by Councilor Gentile and Councilor Lipoff. And it seems to me that just as a safeguard for the kinds of impacts that these particular projects are likely to have on the surrounding areas, it's worthwhile having some parking requirement. Now, there's an argument that's been made all along that this is something to leave up to the development community. I understand that argument. However, I think my concern is that we ought to give some guidance, again, as the Councilor Crossley has indicated, and I would assume the same waiver provision would apply here as we talked about before, which is the planning board. But having something as a baseline will encourage the kind of thoughtful planning that I think will make those zones, if they're ultimately voted tonight, a better fit for their communities. So I would, I don't think they're both in the same vein. I'm happy to take them individually. This would be number 8, and then number 9. Number 8 is 1 parking space for each 1,000 feet of commercial space, and this is only for the commercial uses within the VC zone. And again, remember that the commercial uses here are not affected by the MBTA compliance. This is just straight commercial. And then for the residential, which is number 9, a half parking space for each residential unit not within a half mile of mass transit. So let's try the commercial one first, I think, for purposes of discussion, and then go to the residential and see where we are. And then I would come back to the more impactful proposal, which would involve conversation about our limit and where we go.
Okay, Councilor Baker, you did not mention 1 space for every 8 employees. Are you still including that?
I thought I did, I'm sorry. That's a commercial, 1 parking space for each 1,000 square feet of commercial space and 1 space for each 8 employees for commercial space.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for reminding me.
Thank you. Any comments on this one? Councilor Lucas.
So I'm gonna go in reverse order. I'm gonna start with number 9 that you have there. Half a parking space for each residential unit not within a half mile of mass transit. And a question through the chair to Councilor Baker is, do you mean only the MRT, or are you including all of VCOD?
We've already taken care of MRT because we have 2 different classifications in MRT, an adaptive reuse or new construction. So we've already got parking requirements for that. So this is really only for the VC2 and VC3. I think the net effect of that is the case. Am I correct, planners? Okay.
Kyra, does that make sense?
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so this would essentially be for VC2 and VC3 to put a half of parking space for each residential unit not within a half mile of mass transit. So we're basically looking at the Newton Corner, Nonantum, Upper or Lower Falls, Four Corners, Thompsonville, those villages. They're not near a half mile of mass transit, so a parking requirement would be good for that, and to the best of my knowledge, none of those village centers count towards MBTA compliance. So we would still be in compliant with the state law and the state guidelines. So I'm inclined to support that. The 1 parking space for 1,000 square feet of commercial space and 1 space for every 8 employees of commercial use, not within a half mile of mass transit. So again, outside of the half mile. So it's the same village centers that I mentioned before. I'm going to support that too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Downs.
Yeah, my impression was the straw vote we took at the beginning, voting those villages that are not within a half mile of transit, as Councilor Lucas just mentioned, are kind of off the table. Isn't this rather a moot question?
Well, given our vote at the beginning of the meeting, I would say probably yes. But on the other hand, if we go below the number of units, that we need, the 8330, we may have to bring in one of those or more villages. So it's probably worth discussing. Are you still?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Besides, Madam President,
Yes.
besides, those are straw votes. Those weren't binding votes.
That's right. That was the point. Councilor Krinsman?
Thank you, Madam President. I'm going to speak generally about all of these because the mandatory parking is an issue I feel kind of strongly about. I'm going to oppose all of these, and I'll tell you why. Requiring parking to be built does a few things on these locations. One, it requires the developer to compensate for that mandatory parking by potentially building a larger development. Two, it requires them to use. The first one was great. I'm just going to go right past it. Second one, first, requiring parking requires the developer to compensate for that parking by potentially building a larger development. Number two, it requires that space on the property be used for the parking, allowing us to count fewer housing units. We'll get into the count in just a minute, which may or may not be built, but from a strategic perspective, to comply with the state law, we want to be able to count as many units as possible in these locations, whether they're built or not. The market's going to dictate that some parking may be required. Us requiring the parking hurts our ability to count housing on those locations. It doesn't necessarily mean that the parking won't be built. Other big point here is that one of the big impacts that we are trying to avoid, I think, that people want to avoid, is traffic. When you require parking, you increase traffic. That's what you do. It incentivizes people to bring cars to and from locations, whether it's housing, whether it's commercial, it brings more cars onto the streets. If you do not require parking, there may still be parking built. Developers may still need it, they may realize that the market requires it, but we don't mandate it, and I don't know why we would, as a policy matter, try to encourage more traffic as a result of this development.
Thank you. Does anybody else? Councilor Leary?
Councilor Krinsman, I could talk about parking with you all night, I gotta tell you. There's nothing I need to add to that. I was gonna raise my hand to say exactly the things that you said. There is a saying that parking is like a fertility drug for cars. And again, as I said before, we don't make the best decisions about parking. Why don't we let the market do it? And as you've said, likely parking will get built. Why lose out on the units and spread them out to other villages or into neighborhoods? So thank you very much for all those points.
Thank you, Councilor Laredo.
So I'd like to avoid weighing in on the parking wars this evening. It seems as interesting as they are, and as heated as our discussions are, respectfully, Madam President, I think this can and should be deferred till we see what our maps look like first, because this may be somewhat of a mood issue, or we may vote differently on it, depending on where we are. So I defer this if at all possible.
I'm perfectly happy to defer and do the maps first.
So you want to talk about the maps first and then come back to our favorite topic of parking?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you tabling your motion for the moment?
For the moment, I'm glad to table it if it's
okay.
Okay.
Did somebody else want to speak on this? I guess we're taking it back, so we'll just move on. What about your last item?
Again, I think the map amendments should go first because they have more consequence. And my last item, notwithstanding, I don't want to get into any conversation about reproductive rights here. We're trying to focus on land use. I think, but that one has some reduction in the capacity of the MBTA, so I want to hold that till later.
Okay. All right. So we're moving on to the map amendments. And I guess our first one is, yes, Councilor Wright. You're up first with, do you have that sheet up there again? Yes. I'm going to have Zachary will be putting the map up. Yep. So Well, actually, I don't want to take this one up first. Let's take this one up last. We're going to move on to number 2, which is reducing the VC3 lots 1. Is it still up there? Oh, Zach, Mr. Lamel, you're going to do this part of the meeting? Zach, Mr. Lamel, do you have the text of this amendment?
This is for Newton Highlands, I believe? Or are we doing West Newton?
Yes, Newton Highlands.
Okay. And I discussed it earlier as a friendly amendment to my amendment that Councilor Kalis wants, which I accept. So, and I think he was talking to Mr. Lamel earlier, so why don't we put that up there?
So here we're showing Newton Highlands here? Yep. So what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Because we don't have the text up there anymore.
So here is Newton Highlands, and the red is VC3, which is 5 stories high with a bonus. And for the village centers, especially along Lincoln Street, we want to keep it with the lower heights. The Washington Street Vision Plan, which is, I'll talk about it more in West Newton, does call for lower heights, and Brookline just did it. They just passed their MBTA Act. And on along Harvard Street, their commercial corridor, they did a 4-story max. And I think that would be appropriate in those areas. And I think Councilor Kalis can talk about the others on Walnut and Center.
Yeah, so as a friendly amendment, because I agreed with what Councilor Wright was saying, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parcels, or more than that actually, many parcels there that are not outlined in blue that we would leave as VC3. So those are the ones closest actually to the T. But the total loss here of units, and Mr. Lamel can correct me, but it's 86 units, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So the point of this is to right-size this village center. And as Councilor Wright said, 4 stories at in Brookline, we think that the VC2 would be appropriate here. And I'm kind of going to, make my pitch, which really harkens back to, I live closest to this village center, I think, then, except for Councilor Noel, but closest to this village center on the south side of Route 9 than anybody. And I and many of my constituents in Ward 8, as well as Ward 5 and Ward 6, that are south of Route 9, in that area have 2 ways of getting into Newton Center. One of them is through Needham Street, Winchester, and Center. The other is through Parker. And since we added the lights at Parker, we've had terrible traffic. This council has added, of course, Northland. We also have Northland 40B. We also have 528 Boylston, which is coming, which will most likely be approved. And that's a lot of units for the south side. That's all south of Route 9. When you look at the promise of the reconstruction of Needham Street going onto Winchester and to Center, it's not done, but it's about 2/3 done. And thus far, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't get calls of people complaining. Now, they've been complaining for 12 years about the traffic there, but this is not going to get better. And I have people pleading with me to please don't overdevelop that area. Listen to us, because we have such traffic concerns. Now, I know 86 units isn't going to contribute that much in terms of a drop of traffic, especially with no parking requirements. But at least it's a signal that we're listening. And I think that's very important here. It's only 86 units. We would leave a lot of VC3, still have VC2, and I think that's the right way to go, and that's what I'm advocating for.
Okay, so, just to be clear, you're talking about the blue outlined pink areas become from VC3 to VC2? Is that? Yes. That's it? Okay, just so everybody knows what we're talking about. Comments, Councilor Leary. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Leary. Councilor Noel was first.
Councilor Kalis, I just wanted to follow up as I'm also close to this village. So if you're sitting in traffic, you are the traffic. There's not certain people that get a right to be traffic and others who don't. So if anyone doesn't want to sit in traffic, don't. In terms of, Councilor Auchincloss, who's now Congressman Auchincloss, used to say to us, parking is the birth control, is the reproductive technology of traffic. Not to get into our parking wars or our reproductive wars, but if we want to eliminate traffic, there's other mechanisms to do that. But what fundamentally doesn't sit well with me and is at the heart of some of these zoning changes is this idea of who gets to be here, who came first, who gets to be traffic, who shouldn't have to sit in traffic. The level of entitlement I've never been comfortable with.
Thank you, Councilor Leary, and then Councilor Rado.
Thank you, Madam President. Now, I respectfully disagree with my colleague from Ward 8, and because I think actually you got it wrong in this way, because where these people live right near transit, right in the village center, these are people that are much less likely to drive as much, that it's reducing trips. Where are the cars? The cars are in these huge multi-million-dollar homes that are being built all over the city. A lot of them in Ward 8, actually, Oak Hill Park, where people have three-car garages or bring 3, 4 or more wealthy people, bring a lot of vehicles. This isn't our problem here. These are people that actually will likely make it more walkable, more bikeable. And I'm not saying they're not going to drive or have a car, but reducing car trips is very significant in reducing traffic. I've heard engineers say that even a 10% drop in the number of cars can be the difference between total standstill traffic and cars that move. So that's why I wouldn't support it here, because I don't want to see the congestion and the car, all the cars that are from the larger homes out in our villages, outside our villages and in our neighborhoods. I think exactly for this reason. That's why I think density should be in our village centers, because people are less likely to contribute to the traffic problems that plague our communities. Because, we have been building our communities around cars for 100 years. So what did you expect? We got what we built for.
Thank you, Councilor Rado.
So this strikes me as an eminently reasonable proposal. We're not going to be near, we're going to be, even with the loss of, 87 units, I think it is, we're still, 800 units above or 700 units above the MBTA compliance number. And by the way, I think we should stay above the MBTA compliance number, so we have some buffer there. We don't want to be at 8,331, that's silly, okay? You don't want to go in and again, we want to make sure that we're acting in good faith when we put our proposal there, and we want to be careful about that. So whether we're at 8,500 units or 8,600 units or whatever that number is, it gives us some comfort level that we're in full compliance. I think that's a good idea. We want this to go smoothly. But I think the points that Councilor Wright is making about the scale of that particular village center, I think the points that Councilor Kalis is making make good sense to me, and so I'll be supportive of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Crossley.
Thank you. We did, over the several years, a number of different economic analyses, as well as visual analyses. Starting with economics, we looked at test sites in Newton Center that were typical of the different zones to understand what level of number of stories, what volume of building would be feasible on what kind of a site. Then we added priority streets. So we know that VC2 is economically feasible on many sites, but when you add priority streets and you require retail on the ground floor, we got a ton of information and confirmed by many, especially developers of housing, affordable housing developers, whereas that's their life thing. They don't want to put retail on the ground floor of housing developments because unless they have a lot more volume, because the housing, literally they find, has to, in a way, subsidize the retail uses, that they can't get the kinds of rents that can pay for the large extra expense of building that higher first story, which has to be fire separated from the rest of the building, which has to have separate egress. So there's extra cost to doing that, and the rents, they don't assume the rents are as reliable because they're generally not. So I think we have to be extremely careful when we look at those streets where we understand that, you know, what makes a village, not just housing. We don't want our villages eventually to become only housing. We want them to be mixed use. So we need to be mindful of that, and we were mindful of that as we put these maps together. So I would suggest if people feel strongly about reducing the scale anywhere in these village centers, that you stay away from those priority streets, which are primary to the health and well-being and, you know, whatever mix of those village centers.
Councilor Bowman.
Thank you. As one of the Ward 6 councilors and someone who has spent, although I live in Newton Center, a lot of time in Newton Highlands, having had my kids go to preschool there, and the Ward 6 councilor spent a lot of time thinking about the proposed zoning in this area, thinking about it from a production standpoint, thinking about what is the zoning that would ensure that that some of the historic buildings, like the Stevens Building and the Patterson Block, would be maintained. And we felt very comfortable with the zoning as it exists. I think the really important thing is, just following up to Councilor Crossley's comments, is we do want it to continue to have businesses on the first floor. This is a very small village, and we don't want to lose any of those opportunities. But I think, one of the other analysis I remember in doing this is thinking about, in the VC zones, we really want to encourage not the massing of buildings together for large buildings, but to keep the small buildings. And don't forget, if we limit this, I guess they could always come back and ask for a special permit and, build the buildings higher and group them together. I think, Brookline passed 4 stories. Ours is 3.5 stories, which is not 4 stories, it's 3.5 stories. And then we have 4.5 stories, which granted is a little taller, but it's, I think just the opportunities here, and around the corner we have permitted a building that was very popular. It took a long time through the special permit process, the 1149, 1151 Walnut Street, which is 4 full stories. And no one batted an eye on that. It is taking up, is providing some parking, but it's taking up almost every inch of the lots together. And people were excited about the project. So I see that opportunity here. And then just moving further, that the intersection of Center and Walnut. We've got a super huge parking lot there, and some, there's an opportunity to do something nice a little bit there. So I'm not generally supportive of this. I guess I could get behind downzoning the Stevens building, the two historic buildings, because I don't think they're going to get redeveloped anyway. But I think from a general aspect, I think you should leave it at VC3 so you give the best opportunities for these buildings to be improved, because they are in need of some improvement, and we do need some more people living close to this village to support the businesses that are there and could become there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Danberg. Councillor Danberg.
Thank you, Madam President. I did not hear you first time. Yes, in addition to what Councillor Bowman has just explained, I would like to just add that the 3 Ward 6 councillors spent a great deal of time looking at Newton Highlands, Newton Center, and Elliott Street. And we determined that this was really a good mix and good for, in this case, Newton Highlands. One other thing that I'd like to point out is that as far as traffic is concerned, housing is not what creates traffic problems, it's commuters. A number of years ago, when we did an origin and destination study in Newton Center, we stationed people at the corner of Beacon and Center and at the corner of Center and Cabot to see where the cars were going, where the cars were from, and where the cars were going. And we determined after we turned the people took the license plates down when they turned the plates in to the state to ask the question about where the plates were from, over 80% were from out of town. Also, I think the figure is something like 40% of all of the employed people in the city of Newton work from home, at least part or full-time. So we're not, if we put into our villages housing, that housing is not going to appreciably contribute to the traffic. Because a lot of these people will be able to do a lot of their, get their amenities by walking and going downstairs and doing their business. So I think that I also agree that the possibility of leaving the Stevens building VC2 instead of VC3 is a possibility, because that is a building that we want to make sure we all appreciate. It's an old building, it's very well loved, and we want to make sure that it stays. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. I talked to a small business owner today in Newton Center. Interesting conversation. And she said that her landlord is going to the other businesses around there and making them sign a document saying, basically, we're not going to redevelop this property, but by chance if we do, you won't sue us, so sign here. So that's what's going on. Next thing I'd like to say, VC3 there is going to be 69 feet tall, and the tallest point on the Stevens building is 17 feet lower. So the peak there is, I measured it, is 52 feet. So the building next to the Stevens building is going to tower over it. And if they do a bonus, that's another 13 feet. So next to the Stevens building will be 30 feet taller than the peak of the Stevens building. So I think we need to, if we want to have the prominence of our historic buildings in our village center, we need to bring those heights down. Otherwise, we're going to lose our village centers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kalis.
Thank you, Madam President. So I do have a lot of respect for the councilors from Ward 6, but none of you live on the south side. And the point is that you can't get out of the south side without going Needham Street or Parker Street, which are being clogged. Now, this isn't necessarily all about parking. I know, and Councilor Leary made some excellent points that I agree with. Parking is one of those things, but what is baffling me is this is just 86 units we're talking about. This is not saying that we're going to go under the threshold that we need to meet. I'm also saying it's okay to go 4 stories, just like Brookline did. That's fine. And they didn't go above their number either. Taking 86 units away, why is that such a problem? Is it because we have the votes to pass and we want to do that just to pass it? When we're hearing a lot of mixed emotion from residents. It's not all, yes, I want to pass, or no, I don't want to pass. It's mixed. So for 86 units, I think it's absolutely worth it to say, yes, we're listening to you. And we're still keeping some VC3 there, but combining it with some VC2. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going around a little bit again. So, Councillor Humphrey, you haven't spoken yet. Did you want to speak?
I raised my hand.
Oh, Councillor Oliver, sorry. Councillor Bowman, you spoke on this. So, Councillor Oliver, do you want to speak? You haven't spoken.
Right, thank you, Madam President. I'm going to try not to wrestle with this thing too much. Is that working? No? All right. So I think it's also fair to say that VC3 is probably one of the lightning rods of this entire proposal. I think it's fair to say that, in addition, most of us exist, myself included, in our own echo chambers. We talk to the people who talk back to us. We talk to the people who support us, like what we have to say. Not all the time, but most of the time. I'm going to add just one simple fact here, that we just heard a pretty loud echo chamber last week. Not everybody, of course, is saying VC3 is horrible. Not everybody is saying it's great, give me more. But what compels me here is we're still, if we were to remove or transform the outlined lots to VC2, I think what I've heard here is we will still be achieving not only a significant increase in density in this area, we will probably be enticing the development to go more in the direction of creating less parking at these particular locations, which I've heard is a positive. And let's face it, listening to the voters is what we're here to do. It's not supposed to indicate exactly or dictate how we vote. And that's not what I'm saying we should be doing. And I'm not saying that's what I am doing. But I'm going to support this amendment because this still creates differentiation. It creates density. I believe it's addressing some of the challenges that we're hearing. And again, I will also add that I firmly believe that the Ward 6 councilors did a fantastic effort in thinking this through. But that's 3 of 24 councilors. Let's not forget that either. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lippoff.
I wish I could have been in the chamber, but I've got a cold. I'm going to support this amendment. It makes sense. I do want to say that in most cases, we do defer to the counselors from the ward on a lot of things that we do, land use and others. This is a more broad project that we've been on, and I think that we all almost have an equal take on what's going on regardless of the village. And I'll say that the Ward 8 councillors who are homeless when it comes to having a village center or a train station, we have nothing. So people, where we go is we go to Newton Highlands and Newton Center. So we're invested in those areas as much as anybody else. I really think that this is fine and we should vote it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Downs. I don't think you've spoken yet.
Great, I haven't spoken. Newton Highlands is one of 3 village centers that I frequent a lot, and I know that the Ward 6 councilors have done a ton of work in this village center. Talking to the shop owners, to listening to the area council and so forth, I would support changing the 2 Lincoln Street properties in blue there, the two Lincoln, they aren't individual parcels, but the Lincoln Street parcels that collectively are there on this map. I would support reducing those 2, but I am cognizant that if we don't, that the gas station and the many parking lots out behind O'Hara's there will never get anything done to them if they are not given more flexibility. So I would like to propose, I guess, a friendly amendment or a non-friendly amendment. You guys can decide, of just taking the Lincoln Street ones down and leaving the rest. All right, those 2.
Whose amendment? This is Kalis and Wright. Is that a friendly amendment?
I would accept that.
Okay. So the proposal is now changed to keeping the 2 outlined a little closer to Center Street as VC3, and the 2 outlined on Lincoln Street would become VC2. Yes?
And then we need a new unit count from planning.
Yeah. So do I have that proposal properly?
It'll be less than 86, so it'll probably be like 40 or 50.
Okay. Councillor Bowman and then Councillor Noel.
Do you want to go first on this? Okay, I just want to respond to several things that were said, just to clean up a few things. So Councillor Kalis, it's not the 86 units I take issue with, and I understand it seems inconsequential. What I take issue with is your premise on what creates traffic. So I think that's what we're debating, not whether or not 86 units is inconsequential. I'm debating the premise of what creates traffic. Councillor Wright, you ended your comments with that this height, your closing comment was, we're going to lose our village centers. I have no understanding of what height and losing our village centers have to do with each other. Echo chamber. So here's the interesting thing. I'm not sure, Councillor Oliver, I understood the tense in which you're using echo chamber. So I've been on this council 6 years. There are so many things I didn't know about, and so I researched them. Who would have thought that making a road thinner would actually increase the flow of traffic? Who would have thought that reducing parking spots would actually decrease traffic? So these are all things I learned. It's not people I talked to that told me what I wanted to hear. I actually learned these things from our experts, and it actually has made me crazy throughout my whole tenure that we constantly discredit these experts. They actually have degrees, they know more than me, and I dare say they know more than many of us about how this all works. The other thing I'll say is I was elected to serve out my term, so I'm going to run through the tape. I was elected to serve until December 31st. I'm going to vote my conscience, I'm going to vote what my constituents have asked me to do. They knew what they were getting when they elected Brendan Noel, and I'm going to see this through. Finally, Rick, I love that you want to come to the Highlands. Don't drive there. Everybody, come to our village centers, bike, take a scooter, Uber, leave your cars at home.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman.
No, she's saying I'm next. Thank you. That was lovely. It's really hard to go after you, Councilor Noel. All right, so I just have to get back to the traffic. The big issue in Ward 8, of course, is the new exit that was put off of 128 a long time ago that just makes it very easy to cut through Newton, and that's the biggest issue. So I don't see how downsizing some buildings on Lincoln Street are going to help with traffic for you guys. But what I do see is a very real possibility that VC2 in these areas will mean that these buildings just simply won't ever be redone. And I think that's the biggest risk. Is a big risk and it costs a lot of money, or they'll be done in a way, as I said, tried to say before, but maybe you didn't hear me, so I'll repeat myself, is the risk of multiple buildings being put together for a project, which is not, it's going to feel less village-like because it'll have a bigger footprint. But since I wasn't going to bring up the election, but since it was brought up, no surprise, I won't be returning to the chamber, but I will say, and especially when it comes to the Ward 6 race, the margin was really small. Really, really small. And if I'm looking at who elected me from where, it was the Ward 8 people who didn't vote for either Councillor Danberg and I in very big numbers, but we actually won Wards 1 through 7, if you look at that. So my constituents from Ward 6 want to see Newton Highlands supported. And again, we supported a building next door that I happen to notice wasn't suggested to be downsized, maybe because it's getting rebuilt now, that is a full 4 stories. And again, I think that this is an opportunity. I don't look at it as penalization. I look at it as an opportunity to bring some more life to Newton Highlands. My constituents who live in Newton Highlands want more things to do in Newton Highlands. They want to see vibrant businesses there, and they're only going to be, we've seen the example in Newtonville of what happens when you add just a little bit of housing, 2 new apartment buildings there, and we have so much more vibrancy there. But again, I do understand that there are constituents who are really concerned. Many of the people writing us who I have reached out and spoken to are really confused and have been misled. They believe that we're building 6 and 7 and 8-story buildings in village centers, and that we're truly, if we look to Brookline had a responsibility, sort of their target for the MBTA was like something like 6,900 units. Their calculation of what will be built based on what they've permitted with 4 stories along a good length of Harvard Street, is something in the range of 1,500 units. This, so if we use that as an example, we're talking 2,000 units out of 8,000 units, and we'll be done over time. And, lots and lots of misinformation. So people were being told that, there were going to be 17,000 new units. And that scared people. And I understand people being scared of that. But that is not what we are likely to see. We are going to see. And I think in this case, I'm done. Thank you.
May I ask planning a question? Because Councillor Crossley raised this issue, but I don't know if LandVest actually looked at any buildings in Newton Highlands with respect to the economics of VC2 versus VC3.
No, I don't believe they did, though they were looking at, they were factoring in recent developments and recently approved developments into a lot of their assumptions in their model. So they may have looked at 1149, 1151 Walnut as an example. They didn't do a test fit in Newton Highlands. We are currently undertaking an economic feasibility analysis, which is required by the state to apply our inclusionary zoning rules. And they are also looking at a broad range of recent development, things that have been approved under the IZ ordinance, to determine whether or not our IZ is feasible. These changes that are made on the maps may affect that analysis as to whether or not we can show that it's going to be feasible across the board.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Crossley, I think you were next. And then Councillor Wright.
Thank you. So I take issue with the comments on traffic, Councillor Kalis as well. But for me, it's not the 86 units that is coming out of a formula either. It's what is likely to get built, as Councillor Bowman was describing, and what's going to be approved. What we did in committee is we looked at chunks of parcels, parcel by parcel, in every village center. And I'm not willing to support taking out Lincoln Street in its entirety. Yes, I would support the Stevens Building, which I don't think will be touched anyway, but fine. I've often said that given the nature of Newton Highlands, the south side of Lincoln Street is likely not to be developed either because the lots are so tiny, and it's already 3 stories. A large section of what's overlaid is VC3. It's hard for me to tell from this map. It's a pretty chunky map. It's not real. But a large section of what you see in that shape is actually the public plaza. Public land, as you know, stays intact. There's a public plaza at the other end.
You need some more time.
Okay, do I need a minute? May I have a minute, please?
Councillor Crossley would like another minute. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. But the opposite side of Lincoln Street are the two large lots, which is currently a strip mall. And really, that's the part of Lincoln Street that's the part of Lincoln Street that we illustrated, that we had our consultants do a constructed, scaled perspective drawing looking from the church property. And the good thing about the south side is if you're concerned about shadows, we hear a lot about shadows. The buildings that exist on the south side are going to be what they are. We're talking about the 2 lots that really could make a difference in this village and that are likely, again, it's not the 86 units, Councillor Kalis. It's all of the units that wouldn't be built if this is not feasible in the entire building potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright and then Councillor Rado.
So one thing we discussed a lot in ZAP is if this isn't working, or we can revisit it in 2 years or 3 years. And I rather have it that if we take a look at it, and if it's not working, we'll zone it differently. We're still already zoning for over 25% of our present housing. And I'd like to remind you too, we have over 2,500 units, including 90% outside our village centers, that have been approved or about to be approved. So they're actually going to be built with special permit or with 40B, and there's hundreds more behind it. So the state doesn't expect that all 8,330 units aren't going to be built, but we already have plans and approvals for 2,500. So lowering it down to 8330, I think is a good thing. I thought that's what we discussed before. That's the message I got from voters. They're not saying no, don't do the MBTA Act, but let's bring the numbers down. And then if we don't get any buildings, which we do with special permit, and people say, oh, special permit's so hard, but we have quite a few of them, we can change it in a couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rado.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to respond first to the economic question that you posed, and second, just offer a suggestion as to process. We've zoned lots of places VC2, or proposing them VC2, and obviously we think they're economically viable, or we wouldn't be doing it. So I have personally no concerns about reducing something from VC3 to VC2 because it won't be economically viable. Otherwise, what are we doing with VC2 in the first place? Second, I think economic viability really depends on a very individual analysis of each site. I don't see how we can make generalizations about what the economics are because you don't know if somebody owns the land or is acquiring the land. You don't know the contours of the land. You don't know what's on the land, what you might have to excavate or not excavate. That obviously goes into the cost. You don't know what kind of retail you'd be thinking of putting on the first floor that might generate certain levels of income. You don't know what kind of units you're going to be putting in there, which may have all different price points. So I just don't think we can do that really at all. And I don't think respectfully that's should be how we make our judgments. To me, this is about what Councilor Kalis talked about, what Councilor Wright talked about. It's the scale of the village center. I happen to think that what Brookline did was a wise decision. We can emulate that. Process point, Madam President, it is now 10:30. I sincerely hope that this is the last item we discuss this evening. I really think as a matter of process, it is not good for us to be discussing significant and important issues at a very late hour. We had a lot of
Councilor Laredo, I had already decided with the clerk we would end at 10:30.
Then you're perfect. I don't need to say any more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councilor Lucas.
Thank you, and it's good to know that we're getting out of here in a couple of minutes. I agree with those who said what causes traffic, so I think that was Councilors Crossley, Noel, and Bowman. I agree with that, where the 86 units, if you do the VC3, isn't going to put a dent in the traffic. I agree with that concept. I disagree with the concept where I think it was Councilor Noel who said, if you're sitting in traffic, you're the problem. So I completely refute that philosophy, because if I'm picking up a family member at the hospital and I'm stuck in traffic, I don't see how I'm being the problem. Or if I'm trying to get to work to earn money, whether it's basketball or the 9 to 5 in Cambridge, I don't see how that's the problem. That's how I make a living, by driving around. That's how FedEx truck deliveries, that's how they make money, by driving around. So I refuse to believe that you're the problem if you're sitting in traffic. I agree with Councilor Laredo, and I was going to make that point, but he beat me to it, that I also refuse to believe that VC2 is not viable. Otherwise, why are we zoning every village center has VC2? So it is viable. I want to point out that 28 Austin Street is 4 stories, 48 feet, built with a special permit, 1.5 parking stalls per housing unit underground, which was part of the cost. And yet that project, I presume, is economically viable. It might not be economically viable right now today due to the market and interest rates and inflation and supply chain shortages. So it's not wise to develop today, and we're seeing that in other projects going on in Newton. They're being held. But VC2 is economically viable at 4 stories, or some people call it 3.5 stories. Thank you. I will support the Kalis and Wright amendment.
Thank you very much, Councilor Markowitz.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be brief, because I think most of what I wanted to say, or what I would say, has already been said. No question, parking is, cars cause parking causes cars, and we all believe that, and we say it all the time. I just wanted to add on to the VC2 argument. I don't understand why we would have them if they're not economically viable. I also think Councilor Laredo's comment about every, this city, and maybe it's true in other cities, but every parcel literally does have a different set of requirements that would be attached to it. So it's a deal thing. But I don't think the VC2 is an impediment, and this will come up probably when we talk about Auburndale. This is not the smallest, but it's certainly not the biggest village center. When I was out the other day looking at Trio. Now, I know you can't build Trio necessarily under these rules or what Trio is, but I was looking at the height of Trio. I was just standing on Walnut Street, and I think about the transitions into the neighborhoods and how fast you can actually slope it down into a living area. And what a lot of these village centers that have VC3s in them, I think that's actually the issue. Shadows and everything else that goes with it. So it's not against height. It's just saying that when you get to 4 stories, and let's be realistic, 3.5 stories is 4 stories high. I don't care if you step it back and whatever, it's a 4-story high building, and it still has some of the things. And then you get things like mechanicals and stuff up there too. That can occur in some types of construction. So I just think it's a reasonable proposal to scope a lot of these things to a VC2. And the market will dictate. Sometimes it won't be viable. Sometimes you'll need, given the circumstances, to do something bigger. And if that's the case, you'll look for an alternative. I'll also remind people too. I had this in my own ward. In a BU2, so this is an overlay, right? So you do have a choice. But like in a BU2 zone, where a lot of these things actually lie, you can actually build a lot of stuff. I think it's 1,000 or 1,200 square feet of parcel per housing unit, for example. And that also enables you to have, commercial there as well. When those have come in front of us in land use, in my memory, where a BU zoned property has been proposed to be used for primarily more residential, we've pretty much passed all of those. We've passed them in manufacturing zones too, where we've had to change the zoning as part of it. And of course, those were small manufacturing zones that probably weren't viable for manufacturing as we know it today. But I just say, you can actually do a lot of this stuff. BU1's much more restrictive than a BU2, and a lot of them are in BU1s, but there's a lot of BU2s out there. So if you look at economic viability and say, well, if it's there, then they would be doing it now. I don't know that this is going to make a big difference in some set of those cases. So I'm going to support this amendment. I think it's reasonable, and I think given the scale of this and everything else, and the fact that you are still going to retain some V3s in there, makes sense to me. Thank you.
Okay, I think, oops, Councilor Leary going once, going twice.
Quickly, wasn't there an amendment to this?
Yes, there was. So the amendment would just, Mr. Lamel has them outlined. Those are the 2 that would be reduced to VC2.
So are we voting as amended or not?
As amended.
Okay.
As amended. The ones that there, Mr. Lamel, could you point the 2 pink ones with the blue outline? Yes. And all I ask is that we'll vote on this, but in terms of consistency, all the unknowns that Councilor Markowitz and Councilor Laredo listed about, we don't know if EC2 is going to be viable for this reason and that reason, that we use that same consistency when we look to figure out, well, how many units will actually be produced. All those same unknowns apply for every lot that we're dealing with. So I ask for consistency. Okay, let's call the roll.
Councillor Baker.
Aye.
Councillor Bowman.
No.
Councillor Crossley.
No.
Councillor Damberg.
No.
Councillor Downs.
Aye.
Councillor Gentile.
Aye.
Councillor Greenberg.
No.
Councillor Grossman.
Aye.
Councillor Humphrey.
No.
Councillor Kalis.
Aye.
Councillor Kelly.
No.
Councillor Krinsman.
Aye.
Councillor Laredo.
Aye.
Councillor Leary.
Aye.
Councillor Lipoff.
Aye.
Councillor Lucas.
Aye.
Councillor Maliki.
Aye.
Councillor Markowitz.
Aye.
Councillor Noel.
No.
Councillor Norton.
Aye.
Councillor Oliver.
Aye.
Councillor Ryan.
No.
Councillor Wright.
Aye.
President Albright.
Aye.
Motion carries 16 yeas, 8 nays.
So I think we need to move hold. Councilor Krinsman.
So you mean,
Pardon?
we're not in committee, so we're on the floor of the board. You need to postpone to a date certain.
Yes, okay, that's good, good point. Well, I'd like a motion to postpone to a date certain, which would be our November 20th meeting. Is that what you just moved? All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, and Councilor, moved to adjourn by Councilor Kelly, thank you.